My wife said, "If you don't trust me hanging out with my ex-husband every weekend, maybe we shouldn't be together." I replied, "You're absolutely right." Then I accepted the job transfer to London I'd been declining for her. When she texted, "What are you doing this weekend?" I sent a selfie from Heathrow Airport. My name is Marcus, and at 31 years old, I thought I had this whole adulting thing figured out. Spoiler alert, I absolutely did not. 3 years of marriage to Clara had given me a false sense of security, like those people who think they're invincible because they've never been in a car accident. We had what everyone calls the good life. You know, the kind that looks perfect on Instagram but feels like watching paint dry in real time. Clara was 29, which in hindsight should have been my first red flag. Not because of her age, but because she still acted like she was 22 and discovering herself through bad decisions and overpriced coffee. But hey, love makes you stupid, and I was practically brain dead when it came to her. We had the whole suburban dream package, steady jobs that we complained about but never quit, a shared apartment that we pretended to love but secretly knew was overpriced, and those adorable 5-year plans that couples make when they're high on optimism and low on real-world experience. Everything was cruising along in that beautifully boring way that makes your parents proud and your single friends jealous. I should have known the universe was just setting me up for the cosmic punchline of my life. Because that's when Adrian decided to make his grand re-entrance into our perfectly choreographed existence. Adrian. Even his name sounds like the kind of guy who orders wine at Applebee's and acts like he knows what he's talking about. He was Clara's ex-husband. Yeah, you read that right, ex-husband. Because apparently, my wife had been married before and thought mentioning it casually 6 months into our relationship was totally normal timing. Oh, by the way, I was married to this guy Adrian for 2 years, but it didn't work out because he was emotionally unavailable and had commitment issues. Classic red flag disguised as vulnerability, but I was too whipped to see it when Mr. Emotionally Unavailable decided to grace our little town with his presence again. Clara suddenly developed this overwhelming urge to catch up. And by catch up, I mean systematically replace every weekend activity we used to do together with Adrian-themed adventures. It started innocent enough. Saturday brunch at that overpriced cafe downtown where they serve $12 avocado toast and call it artisanal. Because nothing says just friends like spending your Saturday morning staring into your ex-husband's eyes over Eggs Benedict. But of course, it didn't stop there. It never does it? Saturday brunch evolved into Sunday walks through the park because Adrian was apparently going through some sort of existential crisis and needed Clara's unique brand of emotional support. You know, the kind that requires long, meaningful conversations while strolling past happy families and couples who actually spend weekends together. Then came the Friday movie nights, because poor Adrian was going through a rough patch and needed someone to hold his hand through the latest Marvel movie. Funny how his rough patch seemed to coincide perfectly with our date nights that I tried to be the understanding husband. Really, I did. I channeled every piece of marriage advice I'd ever ignored and attempted to trust my wife. But trust is a funny thing. It's like trying to ignore a mosquito buzzing around your head. You can pretend it's not there for a while, but eventually, you're going to get bit, and it's going to itch like hell. The signs were everywhere, but I was apparently fluent in denial. Clara started wearing this perfume she'd never worn for me. Something expensive and sultry that made our apartment smell like a department store. She'd spend an hour doing her hair for these casual friend meetings, styling it in ways that suggested these hangouts were anything but casual. And don't even get me started on the phone situation. My wife, who used to barely glance at her phone during our conversations, was suddenly giggling at text messages like a teenager with her first crush. The worst part? She laughed at her phone more than she laughed at my jokes. And let me tell you, my jokes are comedy gold. Okay, maybe comedy bronze, but still. When your wife finds her phone more entertaining than you, it's time to reevaluate some life choices. Enter the supporting cast of this tragicomedy. Lila, Clara's best friend, who had apparently appointed herself as the official cheerleader for this disaster in the making. Lila was one of those friends who gives terrible advice with complete confidence, like a GPS that's constantly recalculating but never actually gets you where you need to go. Marcus, she'd say with that condescending smile, you need to understand that exes can absolutely be just friends. It's actually really mature and healthy. Right. Because nothing screams emotional maturity like spending every weekend with the person you divorced. On the other side, there was Jordan, my best buddy, and the voice of reason I chose to ignore. Jordan had this amazing ability to raise his eyebrows in a way that said, "Dude, are you seriously not seeing this?" without actually having to voice his concerns. He'd give me that look every time I mentioned Clara's weekend plans, but being the good friend he was, he'd just tell me to keep cool and trust the process. The process, as it turned out, was my marriage slowly imploding while I pretended everything was fine. But I tried. God help me, I really tried to keep cool. I practiced the art of fake smiling when Clara would come home glowing from her friend dates. I bit my tongue when she'd spend an hour getting ready for coffee with Adrian. I even managed to nod along when she'd tell me about their deep conversations and shared memories, as if I was supposed to be happy that my wife was emotionally reconnecting with her ex-husband every weekend. The unease grew like a tumor in my chest, feeding on every canceled plan, every secretive phone call, and every time she chose Adrian over me. But I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that I was the problem, that maybe I needed to be more secure in my marriage. What I didn't realize was that my marriage was already over. I was just the last one to get the memo. The breaking point didn't come with some dramatic revelation or catching them in bed together like you see in the movies. No, it arrived on a perfectly ordinary Saturday morning with the subtlety of a freight train to the face. I was sitting at our kitchen table, drinking coffee that had gone cold while I pretended to read the news on my phone, when Clara emerged from our bedroom looking like she was headed to a damn photo shoot. She'd done that thing with her hair again. You know, the effortless but actually took an hour look that she'd perfected for her Adrian dates. The perfume cloud hit me before she even entered the kitchen, and I swear I could practically see the cartoon stink lines wafting off her like she was Pepe Le Pew's dream girl. She was wearing this sundress that I'd bought her for our anniversary last year, the one she claimed was too fancy for everyday wear, but apparently just fancy enough for casual Saturday hangouts with her ex-husband. "Morning, babe," she chirped, grabbing her purse and checking her reflection in the toaster. Because nothing says authentic relationship like using kitchen appliances as mirrors while your husband sits 3 feet away, that I looked up from my phone, where I'd been scrolling through the same article about cryptocurrency for the past 20 minutes without absorbing a single word. "Let me guess," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Another emergency Adrian session?" She paused, and for a split second, I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, maybe? Or annoyance that I dared to question her Saturday ritual. "We're just getting coffee, Marcus. He's still going through that rough patch, remember?" Right. The rough patch. Adrian's mysterious life crisis that apparently required more attention than a newborn baby and had been going on for 3 months now. I wondered what exactly constituted this rough patch. Was it his inability to find a decent apartment, his struggle with commitment issues, or maybe just the devastating realization that he'd let Clara slip away? My money was on the latter. "Actually," I said, setting down my phone and looking directly at her, "I was thinking we could try that new place downtown today. You know, the one with the bottomless mimosas you've been talking about for weeks." The suggestion hung in the air like a bad smell. Clara's face went through this amazing transformation. Confusion, then irritation, then that special kind of exasperation reserved for husbands who dare to want to spend time with their wives. She rolled her eyes with the dramatic flair of a teenager being asked to clean her room. "Marcus, we've been over this like a million times. Adrian and I are just friends. We're adults. We can handle having a platonic relationship. Right?" I nodded slowly. "Platonic. Got it. That's why you're wearing the anniversary dress and enough perfume to knock out a horse." "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped, but her hand instinctively went to smooth down the dress. "I always dress nicely when I go out." That was rich. The woman who wore sweatpants to the grocery store and considered putting on mascara a special occasion suddenly had standards for coffee dates with her ex. But I wasn't done yet. Call it masochistic, but I needed to hear her say it. "So skip it today," I said simply. "One Saturday. Stay home with your husband. We'll make pancakes, binge watch something terrible on Netflix, maybe even have actual conversations that don't revolve around Adrian's emotional well-being." You would have thought I'd asked her to donate a kidney. Her face contorted like I'd just suggested we murder puppies for fun. "I can't just bail on him, Marcus. He's expecting me. And there it was. The truth wrapped up in a neat little package with a bow on top. Adrian was expecting her. Not hoping to see her. Not casually available if she happened to be free, but expecting her. Like she was his employee, his therapy appointment, his guaranteed Saturday morning entertainment. What about what I'm expecting? I asked, and even I could hear the edge creeping into my voice. What about the fact that your husband might want to spend time with you occasionally? That's when she delivered the line that would change everything. The words that would replay in my head for weeks afterward like a broken record. She straightened up, put her hands on her hips, and looked at me with the kind of conviction usually reserved for courtroom dramas and political debates. If you don't trust me hanging out with my ex-husband every weekend, maybe we shouldn't be together. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the neighbor's dog barking, a car starting somewhere down the street, the hum of our refrigerator that I'd been meaning to fix for months. But mostly, I could hear the sound of my marriage officially ending, even though neither of us realized it yet that I looked at her for a long time, really looked at her. This woman I'd promised to love and cherish, who was now standing in our kitchen wearing my anniversary gift to meet another man while giving me ultimatums about trust. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. You're absolutely right, I said finally, my voice calmer than I felt. Her face twisted in confusion, like a computer trying to process conflicting commands. This clearly wasn't the response she'd been expecting. She'd probably anticipated tears, begging, maybe even a good old-fashioned fight where I'd storm out, and she could text Adrian about what an unreasonable husband she had. But I meant it. Every single word. Because in that moment, sitting in our kitchen while she stood there ready to choose her ex-husband over me for the umpteenth time, I realized something profound. I was done. Not just with the Adrian situation, not just with the disrespect and the lying by omission, but with the entire charade of pretending this marriage was salvageable. You see, for months I'd been sitting on something that Clara didn't know about. Something big. My company had offered me a dream position, a transfer to their London office with a salary that would make our current financial situation look like pocket change. We're talking $130,000 a year, plus a fully furnished 3-bedroom flat overlooking the Thames, plus my own team to manage. It was the kind of opportunity that career counselors write fantasies about. I'd turn it down. Twice. Because every time I brought up the possibility of moving, Clara would shut it down faster than a nightclub at closing time. I can't leave my family, Marcus. My whole life is here. What about my job? What about my friends? What she really meant was, what about Adrian? Well, congratulations, Clara. You just solved that problem for me. That night, after she'd flounced out for her coffee date with her friend, I sat down at my laptop and composed the email that would change my life. The subject line was simple, London position, acceptance. The message was even simpler. I'll take it. When can I start? The response came back within 2 hours. 2 weeks. Welcome to the team. I smiled for the first time in months. The next morning, Clara woke up with that post-ultimatum regret that hits people like a hangover after a night of drunk texting their ex. You know the feeling, when you realize you've said something monumentally stupid, and now you have to figure out how to backpedal without looking like a complete moron. Spoiler alert, there's no graceful way to do it. She shuffled into the kitchen where I was already dressed and drinking coffee, scrolling through apartment listings in London like a man who'd just discovered Christmas morning. The panic in her eyes was almost comical, like a cartoon character who'd just realized they'd walked off a cliff and were about to plummet into the canyon below. Marcus, she started, her voice doing that weird thing where it goes up at the end like she's asking a question even though she's making a statement. About yesterday, I think maybe we should talk. I looked up from my phone, where I'd been admiring a particularly nice flat in Canary Wharf. Talk about what exactly? Your coffee date with Adrian? How it went? Whether you two discussed our marriage over lattes and croissants. Her face went through that familiar color-changing routine. Pale to pink to red to that special shade of mortified that people get when they realize they've screwed up beyond repair. That's not. We didn't. Marcus, I think you misunderstood what I said yesterday. Oh, this was rich. The classic, you misunderstood me defense, as if the English language had suddenly become too complicated for my simple male brain to comprehend. I set down my phone and gave her my full attention, because this was going to be good. Really? Help me understand then. when you said, and I quote, "If you don't trust me hanging out with my ex-husband every weekend, maybe we shouldn't be together." What exactly did you mean? Because to my admittedly limited understanding, that sounded like an ultimatum. She started doing that thing women do when they're caught in their own trap, the rapid-fire explanation that somehow makes everything worse. I was just frustrated, okay? You've been so jealous and suspicious lately, and I felt like you were trying to control who I could be friends with. I didn't mean we should actually break up. I just meant that trust is important in a relationship. Trust. The magic word that cheaters use when they want to gaslight you into thinking you're the problem. You're absolutely right, I said, standing up and grabbing my car keys. Trust is important. So is respect. And common sense. And not spending every weekend with your ex-husband while your actual husband sits at home like a chump. That's when the waterworks started. Clara's eyes filled up like a broken dam, and suddenly I was the villain in this story. Amazing how quickly the script flips when people realize there are consequences for their actions. "Where are you going?" she sniffled, like I was abandoning her to join the French Foreign Legion instead of just heading to work. "London," I said simply. "I accepted the transfer yesterday. I start in 2 weeks." The silence that followed was so complete, I could have heard a pin drop in the next zip code. Clara's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, her brain apparently unable to process the information I'd just delivered. "You what? You can't. We never discussed. Marcus, you can't just decide to move to London without talking to me." The irony was so beautiful it almost brought a tear to my eye. The same woman who'd been making unilateral decisions about our weekends for months was suddenly concerned about couple communication. Funny thing about ultimatums, Clara. When you give someone an either-or choice, you have to be prepared for them to pick the option you don't want. I left her standing in our kitchen, still in her pajamas, looking like someone had just told her that Santa Claus wasn't real and the Easter Bunny was actually a registered sex offender. The next 2 weeks were like living in a reality TV show where the producers had decided to crank up the drama to 11. Clara went through all 5 stages of grief, sometimes cycling through them multiple times in a single day. It was exhausting to watch and even more exhausting to live through. First came denial. She kept insisting I was being dramatic and that I'd come to my senses once I cooled down. She actually used air quotes when she said it, like my completely rational response to her ultimatum was some sort of emotional breakdown that would pass like a bad case of the flu. Then came anger. Oh boy, the anger. Clara turned into a one-woman demolition crew, slamming doors and throwing around accusations like confetti at a divorce party. I was abandoning her for money. I was running away from my problems. I was emotionally immature and couldn't handle her having male friends. The last one was particularly hilarious, considering her male friend was texting her at midnight and taking her to romantic restaurants every weekend. Bargaining was my personal favorite stage. Suddenly, Clara was full of compromises and solutions that had apparently never occurred to her during the 3 months of Adrian Fest. What if I only see him once a month? What if you come with us? What if we do couples therapy? Too little, too late, sweetheart. You don't get to renegotiate the terms after you've already blown up the contract. Depression hit when she realized I wasn't bluffing. I came home one day to find her sitting on our couch in the same clothes she'd worn the day before, surrounded by tissues like she was preparing for the world's saddest snowball fight. "I can't believe you're really leaving me," she sobbed. "How can you just throw away 3 years of marriage?" "I'm not throwing it away," I replied, continuing to pack my boxes with the efficiency of a man who'd finally found his purpose in life. "You already did that. I'm just cleaning up the mess." But the real magic happened when I started packing her stuff too. See, here's the thing about our apartment that Clara had conveniently forgotten during her victim tour. The lease was in my name. Only my name. Because when we'd moved in together, Clara had insisted on keeping her parents' address for tax purposes, a cute little euphemism for, I want to dodge my civic responsibilities while still enjoying all the benefits of adult life. I packed her belongings with the care and attention of a professional moving service, organized everything neatly in boxes, and placed them by the front door like a thoughtful husband preparing for his wife's extended vacation. The look on her face when she came home to find her entire life summarized in cardboard containers was absolutely priceless. "You can't kick me out," she screamed, apparently forgetting that she'd never legally moved in. "This is my home too. Actually, I said, pulling out the lease agreement that I'd thoughtfully highlighted for her convenience. This is my home. You've been a guest. A very welcome guest for 3 years, but legally speaking, just a guest. And now the guest room is needed for other purposes. That's when she ran to our friends, because nothing says mature adult handling a relationship crisis like running to mommy and daddy, or in this case, to Jordan and Lila and anyone else who would listen to her tale of woe about how her heartless husband was abandoning her for filthy lucre. But here's where the story gets interesting. Remember Jordan, my best buddy with the expressive eyebrows? Well, Jordan had been doing some detective work of his own. The morning of my flight to London, I was feeling pretty damn good about life. My bags were packed, my new apartment keys were waiting for me across the pond, and I had that special kind of zen that comes from finally making a decision that doesn't suck. I was sipping my coffee and scrolling through my phone, mentally calculating what time it would be when I landed. When the doorbell rang like the opening notes of a funeral march, I opened the door to find Clara flanked by her personal cavalry, her mother Teresa, and her younger sister Hannah. They looked like they were heading to either a funeral or an intervention, which, considering the circumstances, was probably accurate on both counts. Teresa was clutching her purse like it contained the nuclear launch codes, while Hannah looked like she'd rather be literally anywhere else on planet Earth. "Marcus, sweetheart," Teresa began, pushing past me into the apartment with the confidence of someone who'd clearly been planning this ambush for days. "We need to talk." Oh, this was going to be good. I gestured them toward the living room, where my suitcases stood like silent witnesses to my impending freedom. Clara immediately started eyeing them like they were ticking time bombs, while Teresa positioned herself on the couch like she was conducting a boardroom meeting. "This sudden move to London," Teresa continued, her voice dripping with that special brand of maternal concern that makes you feel like you're 12 years old and in trouble for breaking the neighbor's window. "It's clearly a cry for help, Marcus. You're having some sort of breakdown, and instead of working through it like adults, you're running away. A cry for help, right? Because accepting a dream job with a massive salary increase and escaping a marriage that had become more toxic than a Chernobyl picnic was obviously the behavior of someone who'd lost his marbles." I nodded thoughtfully, like I was really considering her psychological assessment. "You're throwing your life away," she pressed on, warming up to her theme like a preacher hitting his stride. 3 years of marriage, all the memories you and Clara have built together, your home, your friends, all of it, gone, because you're having some sort of midlife crisis. Midlife crisis. I was 31. If this was my midlife crisis, it meant I was going to die at 62, which, considering how the last few months had gone, didn't sound entirely unreasonable. Hannah chimed in next, because apparently this was a tag team intervention. "What about Clara?" she demanded, shooting her sister a look that was equal parts sympathy and exasperation. "You can't just leave her behind like she doesn't matter. She loves you, Marcus. She made a mistake, sure, but everyone makes mistakes." A mistake. Singular. As if Clara's 3-month emotional affair with her ex-husband was just an oops moment, like accidentally putting salt in her coffee or wearing mismatched socks. I was impressed by their ability to minimize the situation with such artistic flair. Clara herself had been unusually quiet during this opening salvo, probably because she was still processing the sight of my packed luggage. But now she stepped forward, tears already forming in her eyes like she was an actress who'd been preparing for this scene her entire life. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice breaking just enough to sound authentically heartbroken. "Please don't do this. We can work through this. I'll stop seeing Adrian. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't leave me." And there it was, the performance I'd been expecting. The tearful confession, the promises to change, the desperate bargaining that comes when people realize they've pushed someone too far and the consequences are finally catching up with them. It might have been touching if it hadn't come about 3 months and 17 Adrian dates too late. I looked at the three of them, Teresa with her righteous indignation, Hannah with her misplaced loyalty, and Clara with her crocodile tears, and realized this was the perfect moment for the grand finale. The piece de resistance that Jordan had uncovered through his detective work. "That's really touching, Clara," I said, pulling out my phone. "But before we get too deep into the whole redemption arc, there's something I think everyone should see." I opened the screenshots that Jordan had forwarded to me, and held up my phone so all three women could see them clearly. The messages were from Adrian's private gym chat group, where he'd been bragging to his workout buddies about his conquest like some sort of suburban Casanova. "Book club is just code," read the first message. "She's basically single now. 3 months of coffee dates, and she's already planning to leave her husband for me." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Teresa's face went white, Hannah's mouth dropped open, and Clara looked like someone had just told her that her lottery ticket was a fake. But wait, there was more. The next screenshot was even better. "Her husband is such a cluck. Doesn't even know we've been hooking up in my car after every coffee date. She tells him we're just friends." Faced with tears of joy, that last message hit Clara like a physical blow. Her face went from white to green to red in about 3 seconds, cycling through colors like a broken traffic light. Teresa slowly sank back into the couch, her intervention speech apparently forgotten in the face of actual evidence. "Context," Clara suddenly screamed, finding her voice again. "You don't understand the context. Adrian was he was lying to his friends. He was making it sound like more than it was." "Context, the refuge of the caught cheater." "What context exactly?" I asked mildly. "The context where you've been lying to me for 3 months? The context where you've been meeting your ex-husband every weekend while telling me it was innocent? Or the context where you gave me an ultimatum yesterday about trusting you?" Hannah was looking at her sister like she'd never seen her before, which was probably accurate. Teresa had gone completely silent, apparently realizing that her daughter's marriage problems were a bit more complicated than she'd originally thought. "This is all taken out of context," Clara insisted, but her voice had lost all its conviction. She sounded like a defense attorney who just realized her client was guilty as sin, and the jury had already made up their minds. That I looked at each of them in turn, letting the weight of the evidence settle in the room like dust after an explosion. "If you didn't mean the ultimatum," I said finally, "you shouldn't have given it." That ended the discussion more effectively than a gavel in a courtroom. Teresa gathered her purse and stood up without another word, apparently deciding that strategic retreat was better than continued engagement. Hannah followed suit, shooting Clara a look that suggested there would be some very interesting conversations in the family group chat later. Clara made one last desperate attempt at damage control. "Marcus, please. My flight leaves in 4 hours. I interrupted, checking my watch with the casual efficiency of a man who had places to be and lives to live. "Jordan's coming to pick me up in 20 minutes. You might want to call Adrian. I'm sure he'll be very comforting during this difficult time." As they filed out of my apartment, my former apartment, I should say, Clara turned back one more time. "What am I supposed to do now?" "I don't know," I replied honestly, "but I'm sure you'll figure it out. You're very resourceful when it comes to making plans." The door closed behind them with a satisfying click, and I was alone with my suitcases and my freedom. Landing at Heathrow was like stepping into a different universe where the air actually tasted like possibility instead of disappointment and betrayal. I'd left behind the smoking wreckage of my marriage and walked straight into what felt like the opening scene of a movie where the protagonist finally gets his life together. The kind of movie where the guy starts off beaten down and ends up running through the airport in slow motion, while inspirational music plays in the background. That MY new flat was everything the company had promised and more. Located in Canary Wharf, it overlooked the Thames with floor-to-ceiling windows that made me feel like I was living inside a screensaver. 3 bedrooms, modern kitchen, and a view that made Clara's precious hometown look like a strip mall parking lot. Every morning, I'd wake up and look out at the river, watching the boats go by while drinking coffee that actually tasted good because it wasn't seasoned with resentment and marital dysfunction. The office was a revelation too. My colleagues were sharp, ambitious people who treated work like something they actually wanted to excel at, rather than just a way to pay for weekend drama sessions with ex-husbands. My new team was hungry, innovative, and refreshingly free of anyone named Adrian. For the first time in years, I was excited about Monday mornings instead of dreading them like a dental appointment. Meanwhile, back in the land of the free and home of the emotionally immature, Clara was apparently struggling with the concept that actions have consequences. According to my LinkedIn feed, she decided to take her grievances public, posting one of those vague social media manifestos that divorced people love so much. When someone you love abandons you without warning for money and career advancement, It really shows you who they truly are, she'd written, along with some inspirational quote about surviving betrayal and finding strength in solitude. The post was accompanied by a black and white photo of her looking pensively out a window, because nothing says authentic emotional pain like a carefully staged Instagram moment. But here's the thing about small towns and social media. Everyone knows everyone's business, and Clara had apparently forgotten that our entire social circle had been watching her Adrian show for the past 3 months. The comments on her post were absolutely brutal, in that passive-aggressive way that only Facebook comments can achieve. "Didn't you dump him for Adrian, though?" wrote Jessica from her yoga class. "Girl, we saw your stories every weekend with your friend," added someone named Brittany with about 17 crying laughing emojis. "Maybe check the dictionary definition of abandonment before using it," suggested Mike from my old office, who'd apparently been keeping track of the drama like it was his personal soap opera. The post disappeared within 6 hours, which was probably a new record for social media regret. But the internet is forever, and screenshots had already made their way into various group chats and private messages. Clara's attempt at controlling the narrative had backfired spectacularly, like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Then came the plot twist I hadn't seen coming, though in hindsight, it was inevitable. Adrian's girlfriend. Yes, he had a girlfriend this whole time, because of course he did, decided to reach out to me through LinkedIn. Her name was Sophie, and she was apparently everything Clara wasn't: direct, honest, and refreshingly free of bullshit. "I think we need to talk," her message read. "Adrian has been lying to both of us." Sophie, it turned out, was a paralegal who'd been dating Adrian for 8 months. She believed his story about Clara being a crazy ex-wife who was obsessed with him and wouldn't leave him alone. According to Adrian's version of events, Clara was the one pursuing him, showing up uninvited and begging for reconciliation while he nobly tried to be there for her as a friend during her marital difficulties. The cognitive dissonance was almost impressive. Adrian had managed to convince his girlfriend that he was the victim of Clara's obsession while simultaneously bragging to his gym buddies about his conquest. It takes a special kind of sociopathic talent to spin 2 completely contradictory narratives with such confidence that I sent Sophie everything. Every screenshot Jordan had uncovered, every timeline detail, every piece of evidence that painted a very different picture from the one Adrian had been selling her. Her response was swift and decisive. She dumped him publicly on Facebook, posting all the screenshots along with a caption that would have made a prosecutor weep with joy. "Ladies, when a man tells you his ex-wife is crazy and obsessed with him, ask yourself why he keeps meeting up with her every weekend. P.S. Adrian, your gym buddies can read these messages too now." Hope the book club was worth it. Within hours, book club had become Adrian's permanent nickname throughout our entire social circle. The guys at his gym started calling him that. His coworkers picked it up, and eventually it spread to every bar, restaurant, and coffee shop in town. Adrian couldn't go anywhere without someone asking about his book club activities, with a smirk that suggested they knew exactly what kind of books he'd been reading. The beautiful thing about small-town justice is that once you become a joke, you stay a joke. Adrian had gone from thinking he was Don Juan to being the town's official punchline, and there was literally nothing he could do about it. Every time someone saw him, they'd think about those screenshots and wonder what other lies he was telling. But the real karmic justice was watching Clara's reaction to Sophie's post. According to Lila, who'd apparently appointed herself as my unofficial intel source, Clara had tried to spin the whole thing as revenge from a jealous woman who couldn't handle the truth about her relationship. But the screenshots spoke for themselves, and Clara found herself in the impossible position of trying to deny evidence that everyone could see with their own eyes. The comments on Sophie's post were like watching a masterclass in public humiliation. Person after person shared their own Adrian stories. Apparently, this wasn't his first rodeo when it came to manipulating multiple women simultaneously. Clara wasn't his first victim, and she probably wouldn't have been his last if Sophie hadn't blown up his entire operation. My personal favorite comment came from a woman named Rachel who wrote, "Adrian told me the same story about his crazy ex-wife 2 years ago. Seems like all his ex-wives are crazy, which is statistically improbable unless the common denominator is him. Meanwhile, my life in London was everything I'd hoped it would be and more. The work was challenging and rewarding, My apartment was a sanctuary of peace and quiet, and I was finally sleeping through the night without wondering what my wife was texting about at midnight. I joined a local gym where nobody knew my name or my history, started exploring the city like a tourist in my own life, and discovered that happiness wasn't some elusive concept. It was just what happened when you removed toxic people from your daily routine. Every morning, I check my phone to see the latest updates from the American Disaster Channel, formerly known as my marriage. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, except the train had derailed months ago and was now just rolling down a hill, collecting more debris with every rotation. And the best part? I was 3,000 miles away, sipping excellent coffee and building a life that actually made sense. I thought I'd successfully escaped the gravitational pull of my former life's drama, like a rocket ship that had finally broken free from Earth's atmosphere and was cruising peacefully through the cosmic void. My London routine had become beautifully predictable. Excellent coffee, challenging work, Thames views, and a blissful absence of anything remotely resembling the Clara Adrian soap opera. I was living my best life, which apparently made me a prime target for the universe's twisted sense of humor. It was a Tuesday morning. I remember because I'd just finished a particularly satisfying meeting with my team about expanding into the European markets, when I walked out of our Canary Wharf office building and nearly choked on my coffee. There, standing next to the fountain like some sort of deranged tourist, was Clara, in London, 3,000 miles from where she was supposed to be, looking like she'd been sleeping in airport chairs and living off vending machine snacks. For a moment, I wondered if I was having some sort of stress-induced hallucination. Maybe the combination of jet lag and British weather had finally broken my brain, and I was now seeing my ex-wife's ghost haunting the financial district of London. But no, she was definitely real, complete with wrinkled clothes, disheveled hair, and that particular brand of desperation that only comes from making terrible life decisions and doubling down on them. She spotted me before I could duck back into the building and pretend I'd never left. Her face lit up with the kind of manic relief usually reserved for people who've been lost in the desert and just spotted an oasis. She waved at me like we were old friends running into each other at a high school reunion, rather than estranged spouses whose marriage had imploded in spectacular fashion. "Marcus," she called out, jogging toward me with the enthusiasm of a golden retriever who'd just seen a tennis ball. "I can't believe I found you. This city is huge." I stood there, coffee cup halfway to my lips, trying to process the sheer audacity of the situation. She'd flown across the Atlantic Ocean to ambush me outside my workplace like some sort of international stalker. The woman who couldn't be bothered to skip one Saturday coffee date with her ex-husband had apparently found the motivation to book a transatlantic flight and track me down in a city of 9 million people. "Clara," I said finally, my voice carrying all the enthusiasm of someone who'd just discovered a parking ticket on their windshield. "What the hell are you doing here?" By my less than enthusiastic reception, which was rich considering she'd shown up uninvited to my new life, like a walking reminder of every mistake I'd ever made. "I just wanted to talk," she said, her voice doing that wounded puppy thing that used to work on me back when I was stupid enough to care. "Can we get coffee? Please." Coffee. Of course. Because nothing said reconciliation like recreating the same activity that had destroyed our marriage in the first place. But something about her appearance, the dark circles under her eyes, the desperate way she was clutching her purse like a life preserver, made me curious about just how far she'd fallen since I'd left. Against my better judgment, which had clearly taken a vacation to somewhere more sensible, I agreed that we found a cafe near the office, one of those trendy London places that serve coffee in cups the size of soup bowls and charged accordingly. Clara ordered some complicated drink with multiple modifiers, probably trying to delay the inevitable conversation, while I stuck with a simple Americano because I had actual work to get back to. She looked rough. Really rough. The kind of rough that comes from weeks of poor decisions and sleepless nights. Her usually perfect hair was limp and lifeless. Her makeup was minimal and slightly smudged, and her clothes looked like she'd grabbed them off the floor of her childhood bedroom. This wasn't the polished, confident woman who'd been gallivanting around town with Adrian just a few weeks ago. "You look good," she said, which was probably true. London had been good to me. Better sleep, less stress, and the general glow that comes from not living with someone who makes you question your sanity on a daily basis. The city suits you. It does, I agreed, not bothering to return the compliment because honestly, she looked like she'd been hit by a truck carrying a load of regret and poor life choices. She fidgeted with her coffee cup, stirring it obsessively like she was trying to divine the future from the foam patterns. Marcus, I need you to know that I made a terrible mistake. The worst mistake of my life. I was confused and stupid, and I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me. Here we go, I thought. The grand apology tour, complete with self-flagellation and promises of redemption. I'd been expecting this conversation since the day I left, though I'd hoped it would come via email or text message rather than an in-person performance in a London cafe. I've been miserable since you left, she continued, her voice starting to crack around the edges. Absolutely miserable. Nothing feels right without you. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I can't concentrate at work. I just keep thinking about all the ways I screwed up and wondering if there's any way to fix this. The thing about apologies is that they work best when they come before the relationship explodes, not after you've been caught red-handed and faced with consequences. Clara's remorse felt about as genuine as a $3 bill, timed perfectly to coincide with her realization that the grass wasn't actually greener on Adrian's side of the fence. What happened with Adrian? I asked, because I was genuinely curious about how that train wreck had concluded. Her face crumpled like a house of cards in a windstorm. It wasn't what I thought it would be. Once you left, he changed. He became demanding and possessive. He wanted me to move in with him immediately, quit my job, start having kids right away. It was like he thought he owned me or something. Fascinating. Adrian had gone from being the sensitive ex-husband who needed emotional support to a controlling nightmare the moment he thought he'd won. It was almost like he'd been putting on an act to steal someone else's wife, and once he'd succeeded, the mask had come off. Who could have possibly seen that coming? So you broke up? I pressed. I tried to, she said, her voice getting smaller. But he didn't take it well. He started showing up at my work, calling me constantly, telling everyone that I was just having commitment issues and would come around. It was like living with a stalker. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Clara had left a stable, respectful marriage for a man who turned out to be exactly the kind of person she'd accused me of being when I'd questioned her weekend adventures. Life has a funny way of teaching lessons to people who refuse to learn them the easy way. I'm sorry that happened to you, I said, and I actually meant it. Nobody deserves to be stalked or harassed, not even someone who'd made spectacularly poor choices. But I'm not sure what you expect me to do about it. That's when she dropped the bombshell that made this whole conversation shift from pathetic to absolutely insane. I'm pregnant, she whispered, tears starting to flow down her cheeks like a broken faucet. And I don't know what to do. The pregnancy announcement hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud, and for a moment, I genuinely thought Clara had finally lost whatever tenuous grip on reality she'd been maintaining. I stared at her across the cafe table, watching tears stream down her face while she waited for my reaction, and all I could think was, this woman has officially gone off the deep end. That I started laughing. Not a cruel laugh, not a mocking laugh, but the kind of genuine, from-the-belly laughter that happens when someone tells you something so absurd that your brain can't process it any other way. Other cafe patrons started looking over at us, probably wondering if they were witnessing a proposal gone wrong or a mental breakdown in progress. Pregnant, I repeated, wiping tears from my eyes. That's your play here? Really? After everything that's happened, you're going with the fake pregnancy angle? Her face went through several interesting color changes: confusion, hurt, anger, and then that particular shade of red that people get when they realize their lie has been called out publicly. I'm not lying, she protested, but her voice had that hollow ring that bad actors get when they're overselling their performance. Clara, I said, leaning back in my chair with the relaxed confidence of someone who holds all the cards. We haven't had sex in over 2 months. I know this because I was there, or rather, I wasn't there, if you catch my drift. You were too busy with your book club activities to be interested in your actual husband. The silence that followed was deafening. She opened and closed her mouth like a fish gasping for air, clearly trying to come up with some explanation that would make her story believable. But we both knew the math didn't work. and even Clara's creative relationship with the truth couldn't bend reality that far. It could be from before, she whispered weakly, but even she didn't sound convinced. From before what? Before you decided that Adrian was more important than our marriage? Before you started spending every weekend playing house with your ex-husband? Be specific, Clara, because my calendar is pretty clear on when we stopped being intimate. She crumpled then, her whole fake pregnancy facade collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. The tears kept flowing, but now they seemed more genuine. Tears of frustration and desperation rather than manipulative crocodile tears. I just needed you to care, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ambient cafe noise. I thought if you believed I was pregnant, you'd want to work things out. You'd remember that you loved me once. And there it was, the truth wrapped up in the most pathetic package imaginable. Clara had flown 3,000 miles to lie to my face about being pregnant because she thought it would magically erase months of betrayal and manipulation. The woman who'd given me an ultimatum about trust was now trying to manipulate me with fake medical conditions. I did love you once, I said quietly, and for the first time since she'd appeared outside my office, I felt something resembling sadness instead of just irritation. I loved you for 3 years, but you only noticed when I stopped. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, mascara streaking down her cheeks in abstract patterns that would have been artistic if they weren't so pathetic. So what now? You're just going to stay in London forever? Build a whole new life without me? That's exactly what I'm going to do, I confirmed. Because that's what people do when their marriages end. They move on. They build better lives. They don't chase their ex-spouses across international borders with fake pregnancy stories. Clara flew home that night, defeated and broken in ways that almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. But sympathy was a luxury I couldn't afford when it came to someone who'd spent months systematically destroying our marriage and then expected me to fix the consequences of her choices. The real entertainment started after she got back to the States. According to my network of involuntary correspondents, mostly Lila, who seemed to think I needed regular updates on the Clara show, my ex-wife had apparently learned nothing from our London conversation and was already back to her old patterns. 2 weeks after her failed reconciliation mission, Clara was posting Instagram stories from a CrossFit gym, featuring a suspiciously attractive trainer named Damien. Because nothing says, I've learned from my mistakes, like immediately rebounding with another fitness professional who probably had the emotional depth of a puddle. The Instagram posts were a masterclass in self-deception. Clara was suddenly all about self-improvement and working on herself, posting inspirational quotes about how soulmates arrive when you're ready to work on yourself, and the universe brings you what you need when you need it most. The irony was so thick you could package it and sell it as a dietary supplement. Meanwhile, back in London, I was discovering that karma has a sense of humor that rivals any comedy writer. Adrian, apparently unable to learn from his previous humiliation, had somehow managed to land a job in London. Not just in London, but in the exact same corporate housing building where I was living. The universe was either testing my patience or setting up the world's most elaborate practical joke. I first encountered him in the lobby on a Tuesday morning, looking every bit as smarmy as I remembered, but now with the added bonus of seeming slightly desperate. He was with a young woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. All legs and cheekbones, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having experienced real consequences for poor decisions. Marcus, Adrian called out, like we were old college buddies who'd lost touch over the years instead of the two corners of a love triangle that had exploded spectacularly. What are the odds? Small world, right? He introduced the young woman as Chloe, his girlfriend, with air quotes that suggested their relationship status was about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Chloe looked at me with mild interest, clearly not knowing she was standing next to both the victim and the perpetrator of one of the Messier relationship disasters in recent memory. Adrian, I nodded politely, because I'd learned that the best revenge is living well and not engaging with people who've already proven they're not worth your time. Chloe, nice to meet you. By the end of that week, Chloe had dumped Adrian in the building's WhatsApp group chat after discovering his illustrious history with married women. Apparently, someone in the building had done their homework and shared the screenshots from Sophie's Facebook post. The message Chloe left was a thing of beauty. Ladies of Riverside Court. Adrian Thompson is a serial cheater who specializes in breaking up marriages. He told me his ex-wife was crazy and obsessed with him. Turns out she was just married to someone else at the time. Also, he cries after sex. You've been warned. Within hours, everyone in our 200-unit building knew Adrian as that guy who cries after sex and breaks up marriages. His nickname evolved from Book Club to Cry Club, and residents started crossing the street to avoid him in the hallways. The beautiful thing about living in corporate housing is that gossip travels faster than Wi-Fi, and Adrian's reputation preceded him everywhere he went in the building. The concierge started smirking when he walked by. The gym staff exchanged knowing looks, and even the cleaning lady gave him side-eye that could have melted steel. Justice served with a side of public humiliation, exactly what the doctor ordered. Meanwhile, back in the good old US of A, Clara's relationship with Damien, the CrossFit trainer, was following the predictable trajectory of all rebound relationships that start with Instagram stories and end with restraining orders. According to my unofficial intelligence network, which consisted mainly of Lila's inability to keep her mouth shut and my own morbid curiosity, things had gone south faster than a penguin convention. The details, as relayed to me through a series of increasingly dramatic phone calls from Lila, were almost too perfect to be true. Clara had walked into the gym one evening for her regular session with Damien, probably expecting to work on her squats and her emotional baggage simultaneously, when she discovered him in the back room, helping his ex-girlfriend with some very creative stretching exercises. Now, I'm no fitness expert, but I'm pretty sure that particular position isn't recommended in any legitimate workout manual. Unless Damien was pioneering some revolutionary new form of couples yoga that involved significantly less clothing and significantly more betrayal than traditional exercise routines. She just stood there for like 5 minutes, Lila had breathlessly reported during one of her gossip update calls. Like, completely frozen. Damien and this other girl were so into their stretching session that they didn't even notice Clara watching them through the mirror. The image of Clara standing there, probably still holding her gym bag and water bottle, while watching her rebound relationship implode in real time, was almost poetic. Here was a woman who destroyed her marriage for the thrill of cheating, only to discover that cheaters tend to cheat on everyone, not just other people's spouses. When Damien finally noticed Clara's reflection in the mirror, because apparently even mid-betrayal, he was still checking himself out. The ensuing confrontation was legendary enough to become gym folklore. Clara, channeling all the righteous indignation she'd never directed at herself, had apparently launched into a tirade about trust and respect that left everyone within earshot wondering if they were witnessing performance art or a psychological breakdown. "How could you do this to me?" she'd screamed, according to multiple eyewitness accounts that made their way through the local gossip network faster than a viral TikTok video. "I trusted you. I thought we had something real." The irony was so thick you could have used it as a protein shake. Clara, who'd spent 3 months sneaking around with her ex-husband while married to someone else, was suddenly an expert on trust and fidelity. The woman who'd given her actual husband an ultimatum about trusting her was now devastated to discover that her trainer boyfriend was exactly as trustworthy as she was. But wait, there's more. Because apparently the universe wasn't finished serving up justice with a side of poetic comeuppance. Clara, in her emotional distress over discovering that cheaters tend to be cheaters, had made the brilliant decision to text me about her revelation. At 3 a.m. London time, which was 10 p.m. her time, my phone buzzed with a message that I initially thought was some sort of drunk dial situation. "Now I know how you felt. I'm so sorry." That was it. No context, no explanation, just a sudden burst of empathy that had apparently taken her entire relationship with Damien to develop. I stared at the message for a few minutes, marveling at the fact that it had taken Clara experiencing betrayal firsthand to understand what betrayal felt like. Revolutionary stuff? Really? I left her on read. Not out of cruelty, but because what exactly was I supposed to say? "Thanks for finally developing basic human empathy after destroying our marriage. Congratulations on learning a lesson that most people figure out in elementary school." There was literally no response that wouldn't either encourage her delusion that we could reconcile or make me sound like a complete bastard. But karma, as it turns out, was just getting warmed up. Because while Clara was dealing with her trainer boyfriend's creative interpretation of physical fitness, she was about to discover that her past decisions had consequences that extended far beyond broken hearts and damaged pride. Remember Sophie? Adrian's ex-girlfriend who'd blown up his entire operation with those beautiful Facebook screenshots? Well, Sophie worked in the tax department for the city, and she'd apparently been doing some digging into Clara's living situation during their relationship. That it turns out that Clara's clever little scheme of using her parents' address to avoid city taxes while actually living in our apartment had caught someone's attention. Someone with access to employment records, lease agreements, and the kind of bureaucratic dedication that makes the IRS look friendly and approachable. The audit notice arrived on a Tuesday, according to Lila's breathless report. Clara had opened what she thought was junk mail to discover that the city wanted to have a very serious conversation about her tax obligations for the past 3 years. Specifically, they wanted to know why someone who was employed full-time in the city, had a city-issued parking permit, and was registered to vote at a city address had been claiming residency in her parents' suburban township. The amount owed was spectacular: 3 years of back taxes, plus penalties, plus interest, plus administrative fees that seemed to multiply like rabbits in springtime. The final tally came to just over $18,000, which might as well have been $18 million for someone who'd been living paycheck to paycheck, while spending her disposable income on weekend dates with her ex-husband. Clara's parents, bless their enabling hearts, had bailed her out financially. But they'd also forced her to move back into her childhood bedroom as part of the bailout agreement, because apparently even they had limits to how much financial irresponsibility they were willing to subsidize without consequences. The image of Clara, at 29 years old, moving back into her teenage bedroom with its faded boy band posters and high school trophies, was almost too perfect to be real. The woman who'd been so eager to play house with Adrian every weekend was now literally back in the house where she'd grown up, under her parents' roof and their rules. She has a curfew now, Lila had reported with barely concealed glee. Her mom makes her be home by 11 p.m. on weeknights and midnight on weekends. It's like she's 16 again, except with massive debt and a destroyed marriage instead of college applications and prom planning. Meanwhile, my life in London continued to improve in ways that made me question whether I'd accidentally stumbled into some sort of alternate universe where good decisions actually led to good outcomes. The promotion I'd been hoping for came through ahead of schedule, along with another salary increase that made my former American income look like pocket change. I was offered a permanent position with the company, complete with visa sponsorship and a clear path to British residency if I wanted it. But the real victory wasn't professional, it was personal. I'd met someone. Her name was Aoife, she was Irish, and she worked as an editor for a publishing house in Bloomsbury. Smart, funny, grounded, and refreshingly free of any desire to maintain relationships with her ex-boyfriends. When I told her the book club saga over dinner one evening, she'd laughed until tears streamed down her face. "Sounds like your wife was reading the wrong chapters," she'd said, and I'd known right then that this was someone I wanted to keep around. With Aoife, everything was easy. No drama, no secrets, no weekend disappearances or mysterious text messages. Just two adults building something real together, based on honesty and mutual respect. Revolutionary concepts, apparently. Every time Adrian saw me with Aoife in the building lobby or the local pub, I could see the jealousy eating him alive from the inside. The man who'd thought he was winning by stealing someone else's wife was watching me build something better with someone who actually deserved it. Karma, it seemed, had a sense of timing that would make a Swiss watchmaker weep with envy. While Clara was navigating the exciting world of parental curfews and tax debt, my life in London had evolved from escape disaster to actually thriving in ways I didn't know were possible. It's amazing how much your perspective shifts when you're not constantly wondering if your spouse is lying to you about where she's spending her weekends. Who knew that trust and honesty were such game changers in the happiness department? The promotion had come with perks that made my old life look like I'd been living in black and white, and someone had suddenly invented color television. Not just the salary bump, though going from comfortable to holy shit, I can actually afford things without checking my bank balance first, was pretty spectacular, but the whole package. Company car, expense account, and the kind of professional respect that comes from working with people who view competence as a baseline rather than an aspiration. My team was killing it in the European markets, which apparently made me some sort of corporate golden boy. The kind of success that would have made Clara proud back when she was capable of being proud of anything that didn't involve her ex-husband. Now it just felt like vindication. Proof that I'd made the right choice when I'd walked away from that toxic situation and chosen myself for once. But the real transformation wasn't professional. It was Aoife. Meeting her had been one of those random London moments that make you believe in cosmic timing. I'd been sitting in a pub in Bloomsbury after a particularly good day at work, reading emails and enjoying a pint, when this woman at the next table had started laughing at something on her laptop. Not polite chuckling, but the kind of genuine, infectious laughter that makes you want to know what's so funny that she'd been editing a manuscript. Something about a man who thought he could win back his ex-wife by pretending to be a food critic, and the absurdity of the plot had apparently struck her as hilarious. When she'd noticed me trying not to eavesdrop, she'd shared the joke, and we'd ended up talking until the pub closed. Aoife was everything Clara wasn't. Where Clara was all surface-level drama and emotional manipulation, Aoife was substance and authenticity. She said what she meant what she said, and had never once in our relationship made me wonder if she was secretly texting someone else while sitting next to me. Revolutionary concepts, apparently. She was also funny in ways that didn't require an audience or social media validation. When I told her the whole book club saga over dinner one night, she'd listened with the kind of attention that suggested she was actually interested in understanding what had happened, rather than just waiting for her turn to talk. So let me get this straight, she'd said, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. Your ex-wife spent 3 months cheating on you with her ex-husband, gave you an ultimatum about trusting her, and then flew to London to lie about being pregnant when you took her up on that ultimatum? That's the condensed version, yes. And now she's living with her parents because she got caught committing tax fraud. Also yes. Sounds like your wife was reading the wrong chapters, she'd said, and that line had become our private joke. Anytime we encountered relationship drama, whether in movies, books, or real life, one of us would comment about people reading the wrong chapters. With Aoife, everything was refreshingly normal. We traveled together without it becoming a logistical nightmare or an excuse for Instagram content. We cooked together without turning it into a competition or a therapy session. We built something real based on actually liking each other as people, rather than just being addicted to the drama and chaos that some people mistake for passion. The contrast wasn't lost on me, especially when I'd see Adrian around the building. Poor Adrian, who'd gone from thinking he was the main character in some romantic drama to being the punchline of everyone's jokes. The man couldn't walk through the lobby without someone making a book club reference or asking if he needed tissues. His professional life in London hadn't exactly flourished either. Word travels fast in corporate circles, especially when someone has a reputation for being the kind of person who breaks up marriages for sport. Adrian's career trajectory had gone from promising transfer to why is that guy still here in record time. But the real entertainment came from watching him try to process seeing me happy. Actually, genuinely happy, not just pretending to be fine while dying inside. When Adrian saw me with Aoife, laughing at her jokes, holding her hand, looking like someone who'd finally figured out what healthy relationships were supposed to feel like, the jealousy in his eyes was absolutely priceless. This was the man who'd thought he was winning by stealing Clara away from me, who'd bragged to his gym buddies about his conquest, who'd convinced himself that he was some sort of romantic hero rescuing a woman from an unhappy marriage. Now he was watching me build something infinitely better with someone who actually deserved it, while he lived alone in corporate housing with a reputation that followed him like a bad smell. The irony was beautiful. Adrian had gotten exactly what he'd wanted, Clara, and discovered that winning a prize nobody else wants isn't actually winning at all. Meanwhile, I'd lost something I'd thought I wanted to keep and found something infinitely better in the process. Aoife and I started talking about making things permanent. Not in the rushed, desperate way that people do when they're trying to fix something broken, but in the calm, confident way that happens when you've found someone who makes sense. British residency, long-term plans, the kind of future building that actually felt exciting rather than terrifying. The company had offered to sponsor my permanent residency, which would put me on track for British citizenship if I wanted it. The idea of officially cutting ties with my old life, of literally becoming a citizen of a different country, felt like the ultimate fresh start. Not running away from my problems, but graduating from them into something better. Every weekend with Aoife was a reminder of what weekends were supposed to feel like. No mystery plans, no secret meetings, no wondering if the person you loved was lying to your face about where they were going. Just two people who enjoyed each other's company. Building memories instead of collecting secrets, we'd take day trips to Bath or Brighton, explore different neighborhoods in London, or just spend lazy Sundays reading in bed while rain pattered against the windows. Simple pleasures that felt revolutionary after 3 years of marriage to someone who treated our relationship like a part-time job she was constantly trying to quit. The best part? Adrian got to watch it all unfold, since we lived in the same building. Every time he saw us together, coming back from a weekend trip, heading out for dinner, or just walking through the lobby looking like people who actually liked each other, I could see it eating away at him. This was the life he'd thought he was destroying when he'd seduced Clara away from me. Instead, he'd done me the biggest favor of my life by removing someone who was never going to make me happy and clearing the path for someone who actually could. Karma, it turned out, had a sense of poetry that would make Shakespeare weep with envy. Looking back on this whole clusterfuck of a year, I have exactly one regret: not taking the London job the first time they offered it to me. Not the second time either, but definitely not the first time. I could have saved myself months of watching my marriage decompose like roadkill in the summer heat. Months of pretending that Clara's weekend book club activities were anything other than a slow-motion betrayal set to the soundtrack of my own denial. The truth is, I'd been sacrificing pieces of myself for someone who never valued the sacrifice. While I was turning down dream opportunities and restructuring my entire future around Clara's unwillingness to leave her precious hometown, she was busy restructuring her weekends around her ex-husband's emotional needs. The math never worked in my favor, but I'd been too invested in the sunk cost fallacy to notice. You know what's funny about hindsight? It's not just 2020. It's high-definition, IMAX quality clarity that makes you wonder how you ever missed the obvious signs that your life was turning into a daytime soap opera. Every red flag I'd ignored, every excuse I'd accepted, every time I'd chosen to trust someone who was systematically proving herself untrustworthy. It all looked so painfully clear from my Thames View apartment in London. Clara's social media presence these days is a masterclass in performative healing. She posts those cryptic, inspirational quotes that divorced people love so much. You know the ones. Growth through pain, stronger than yesterday. The universe removes people from your life to make room for better things. All with comments turned off, because apparently enlightenment doesn't include being open to feedback. My personal favorite was her recent post about learning to love yourself before you can love someone else, which was rich coming from someone who'd spent our entire marriage seeking validation from every man except her actual husband. But hey, if Instagram quotes about self-discovery help her sleep at night in her childhood bedroom, more power to her. Adrian's online presence, meanwhile, has become virtually non-existent. The man who used to post gym selfies and motivational content about grinding and winning has gone dark, probably because it's hard to maintain a personal brand around success when everyone knows you as Book Club or Cry Club, depending on which scandal they remember better. Last I heard through the London corporate housing gossip network, he'd been trying to transfer back to the States. But apparently his reputation had followed him across the Atlantic like a particularly persistent curse. Turns out that breaking up marriages and crying after sex aren't exactly the kind of qualifications that make HR departments excited about internal transfers. The beautiful thing about karma is that it doesn't just serve justice. It serves justice with style. Adrian had thought he was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers, but it turned out he was actually playing Russian roulette with his own reputation while everyone else was just living their lives like functional adults. And me? I'm building a life that actually makes sense. A life with someone who doesn't need an ex-husband to feel complete, who doesn't mistake drama for passion, and who thinks the concept of book club as code for cheating is as ridiculous as it actually is. Aoife and I are planning a trip to Ireland next month to meet her family, which feels like the kind of normal relationship milestone that Clara and I never managed to achieve without turning it into a crisis or an excuse for her to reconnect with someone from her past. It's amazing how simple things become when you're with someone who actually wants to be with you. The visa paperwork for permanent residency is moving along faster than expected, which means I'll officially be a British resident by the end of the year. There's something poetic about legally cutting ties with the country where my marriage imploded and officially becoming a citizen of the place where I finally figured out how to be happy to all the people back home who said I should have fought harder for Clara. I have one question. Why? Why fight for someone who gave me an ultimatum about trusting her while she was busy proving herself untrustworthy? Why battle for a marriage with someone who was already emotionally checked out and planning her next relationship? Fighting for your marriage makes sense when both people want to save it. It's romantic and noble and all those things that look good in movies. But fighting to keep someone who doesn't want to be kept is just elaborate self-harm disguised as love. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone go so they can discover firsthand that the grass isn't actually greener on the other side. Clara wanted to explore her options. I gave her that opportunity by removing myself as an option. She wanted to see if Adrian was worth more than our marriage. I let her find out. She wanted freedom from our relationship. I provided it, along with a front row seat to watch what that freedom actually looked like in practice. The universe has a twisted sense of humor, but it also has impeccable timing. Every time I look out at the Thames from my apartment, or book a weekend trip to Paris with Aoife, or get another promotion at work, I'm reminded that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. You can't build a life worth living on the foundation of someone else's indifference. Clara's living in her childhood bedroom, dealing with tax debt and parental supervision, because she chose drama over stability. Adrian's reputation is so toxic that even LinkedIn recruiters probably cross the street when they see his profile. And I'm planning Christmas markets tours with someone who thinks my jokes are actually funny and doesn't need to check her phone every 5 minutes to feel validated. The math works out pretty clearly when you actually do the calculation that I don't hate Clara anymore. Hate requires too much emotional energy, and frankly, I've got better things to do with my feelings these days. I don't even feel sorry for her, because everything that happened to her was the direct result of her own choices. She wanted to play adult games, and she won adult prizes. If anything, I'm grateful. Grateful that she was stupid enough to give me that ultimatum. Grateful that she made her priorities so obvious that even my denial couldn't rationalize them away. Grateful that she freed me from a marriage that was slowly killing everything good about who I used to be. Sometimes people do you the biggest favor of your life by showing you exactly who they are. Clara showed me that she was someone who would choose her ex-husband over her actual husband. Someone who would lie and manipulate and blame everyone else for the consequences of her actions. And in showing me who she really was, she also showed me who I could become. Someone who refuses to settle for less than he deserves. Someone who chooses happiness over familiarity. Someone who finally learned that you can't love someone into being worthy of that love. Every morning when I wake up in London, in my beautiful apartment with my beautiful life and my beautiful girlfriend who actually wants to be there, I smile and think the same thing. I finally chose myself. And it was the best decision I ever made. It started with those 5 classic words. I need a break, Mason. She said them with a softness that felt rehearsed, like she'd been practicing in front of a mirror, finding just the right balance between pity and resolve. Rielle stood at the kitchen counter, swirling her wine glass, eyes glistening with a guilt that might have been real, or maybe it was just for show. I watched her, her posture too straight, like she was bracing for a fight. But there was no fight left in me. I'd been running on fumes for months. Ever since she started coming home later, her perfume different, her phone buzzing at midnight with muted laughter. I knew something was off, but I'd hoped it was just work stress, or maybe her anxiety flaring up again. But then she said it. I need a break, Mason. The words hit me harder than any slap. I felt them in my bones. I could almost hear the final click of a door locking behind me. I tried to hold her gaze, but she turned away too quickly, focusing on the swirl of her wine as if it could tell her something she didn't already know. I've lost myself, she continued. Her voice cracked like a porcelain cup splitting under pressure. No contact, for clarity. That's what she called it. Clarity. Like our marriage was some foggy mirror she needed to wipe down, alone. I didn't yell, didn't beg, even though part of me wanted to. Wanted to grab her arms and shake her out of whatever trance she'd slipped into. But I didn't. Because the woman I married was asking for space, and if space was what she needed, who was I to deny her that? She packed a single duffel bag, just enough clothes for a week, maybe two, and said she'd stay with her sister, Nadine. I watched her move around the apartment, carefully selecting what to take, what to leave behind. Her favorite cardigan, the worn-out yoga pants she always wore on Sundays. A half-empty bottle of rose-scented lotion. It felt like she was curating a version of herself to take on her journey, like I was no longer part of the exhibit. I stood by the doorway, silent, as she zipped up the bag and looped the handles over her shoulder. She didn't meet my eyes, and I didn't push for it. She paused at the door, one hand on the knob, and let out a sigh that sounded like a rehearsal for a different life. "I'll call you when I'm ready," she said, her voice small. I nodded. That was it. No kiss. No promise. Just a whisper of an apology and a final click as the door closed behind her. I didn't chase her. I didn't call out. I just stood there, staring at the door like it might open again, and she'd come back, realizing this was all a mistake. But the silence that followed was a verdict. I let her walk out. I told myself it was what she wanted, what she needed. But deep down, I couldn't help feeling like I just watched the end of something I tried so hard to build. Something that used to make sense, but now felt like a story written in a language I no longer understood. The kitchen smelled like her perfume, a lingering reminder that she'd been here, that she'd once belonged to this space. I looked at the half-empty wine glass on the counter, the smudge of her lipstick on the rim. My chest ached in a way I couldn't quite describe, like a cavity that had been hollowed out and left to echo with every small sound. The clock ticked, relentless, counting down the seconds since she'd left. I wanted to call her, to ask her what she meant by clarity, to beg her to stay. But I didn't, because I wasn't that man anymore. I'd given her space, and I'd given her silence. I wandered into the living room, staring at the couch where we'd sat together so many nights, tangled up in blankets and each other's stories. Now it felt like a museum piece, an artifact of a life that no longer belonged to me. I sank into the cushions and let the silence settle around me like a blanket. I didn't know then that I was watching the end begin, that every small choice, every quiet second, was leading me to a moment I couldn't yet see. The wineglass in the kitchen gleamed under the overhead light. I thought about washing it, but I left it there, like a reminder, like a question. The air felt different, stiller. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to carry a different tone. A note of finality that rattled my bones. I pressed my palms together, the skin dry and unfamiliar. My thoughts wandered to Nadine's place, how Brielle would be there, telling stories about our marriage that would paint me as the villain or the victim, depending on the audience. I wondered if she'd mention the nights I'd stayed up worrying about her, or the days I'd worked overtime just to give her everything she'd ever asked for. I closed my eyes and let the darkness come. In that moment, I decided I wouldn't call. I wouldn't text. I wouldn't chase her down the path she'd chosen. If she needed space, I'd give it to her. If she needed silence, I'd let the silence fill the air between us like a wall. And in that silence, I'd find my own answers, my own clarity. Because if she could walk out so easily, maybe I needed to know who I was without her. Maybe I'd been holding on too tight to a version of us that no longer existed. So I sat there, breathing in the quiet, letting the weight of her absence sink in. And in that stillness, I realized that sometimes the beginning of the end feels just like any other Tuesday night, just like any other sigh at the door, just like any other whispered, "I just need space." 10 days later, I was scrolling through my phone, mindlessly swiping past the cluttered noise of notifications and updates, trying not to miss her too much. The apartment was too quiet, filled with that stale sort of silence that settles in when you vacuumed and reorganized just to fill the time. I'd blocked her on most social media accounts after she left, some combination of self-preservation and quiet anger, but I hadn't blocked her mom, Loretta. I guess some part of me wanted to hold on to a lifeline, a way of knowing what was happening without having to ask. A window into the mess. It was late. Somewhere between the hour when the world sleeps and the hour when the insomniacs stir. I was sitting at the edge of the bed, the glow of the screen painting my face in pale blue light, when I saw it. Loretta's post. Family reset retreat. Feeling grateful. A carousel of sunny photos lined up beneath the caption, a parade of beach chairs and brightly colored cocktails, perfectly manicured toes in the sand. And there she was, Brielle, beaming in every single one of them. She looked radiant, hair sunlit and skin glowing, The kind of glow you can't fake with a filter. 100-watt smile in every frame. But it wasn't the smile that punched me in the gut. It was him. Jared. The same Jared she'd always told me was a harmless high school fling. The he never meant anything guy. The we barely talk guy. And there he was in photo after photo. Tanned, shirtless, his arms slung casually around her waist in a way that said he'd done it 1,000 times. Like he'd never stopped. Like I'd never even existed. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening like a fist. Each photo felt like a new slap. There was the one where she wore that orange bikini she'd ordered off some influencer's page. She'd modeled it for me in our bathroom mirror, asking if it made her look too young. There she was, smiling wide, arms around Jared's neck, his hands planted firmly on her hips. Like she was proud to be his. Like she'd chosen him long before she chose me. My thumb hovered over the screen, stuck between rage and disbelief. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. Instead, I just stared. The captions didn't help. Family bonding. Grateful for these moments. Grateful for him? I scrolled back, hoping, praying that maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe there was some explanation. Maybe Jared was there with his own family and just happened to be in the frame. But every photo told the same story. Her, leaning in, eyes bright, smile wide. Like this was the life she'd been waiting for. Like every promise she'd made to me was just an afterthought. And in the background, Loretta smiling like the queen she always wanted to be, holding court over her perfect family vacation, her perfect daughter, her perfect new son-in-law in waiting. It was too much. Too perfect. The rage that simmered under my skin felt foreign, raw, and electric. It felt like betrayal with a capital B. Like I'd been a fool to think she needed space to figure herself out. No, she needed time to figure it out with Jared's hands on her hips. I clenched my jaw, fighting the urge to call her, to demand answers, to scream through the phone that she'd lied to me. But I knew better. Knew that if she could smile like that in those photos, then she'd made her choice. And I'd be damned if I'd let her see me crack. I let the phone drop into my lap, the screen still glowing with her smile. The room felt too small, too empty. I could still smell her perfume on the pillows, the faint echo of her laughter in the walls. But it was all an illusion, a memory that no longer belonged to me. She'd chosen him, or maybe she'd always wanted him, and I'd just been the placeholder, the bridge she needed to get from one heartbreak to another. The thought made me feel sick. I stood and walked to the kitchen, the overhead light too bright, the white tiles too clean. I gripped the counter and took a breath, letting the anger cool just enough to think straight. I needed to make a decision. I couldn't keep sitting here, scrolling through photos that would only make the wound deeper. I opened the fridge, pulled out a bottle of water, and stared at it like it might offer some comfort. But it didn't. Nothing would. Because I was alone. And I was the one who let her go. I remembered the way she'd said it. Like she was doing me a favor. I need a break, Mason. Like I was the reason she couldn't breathe. Like I'd smothered her dreams and ambitions and she just needed space to spread her wings. But in those photos, she didn't look like she was searching for herself. She looked like she'd found exactly what she wanted. And it wasn't me. I walked back to the living room, phone still in hand. I clicked on Loretta's post again, forcing myself to look at every photo, every detail. The palm trees swaying in the background, the turquoise water glistening, the cocktails sweating in the heat. It looked like paradise, a place where heartbreak couldn't reach. I wondered if she'd thought of me at all, if, even for a second, she'd felt the ache of the space she'd left behind. Probably not. Not with Jared there to fill in the blanks. I sank into the couch, feeling the weight of my own decisions. I could call her. I could send a text demanding answers, but what would that prove? That I was weak enough to beg for an explanation she'd never give? That I was still tethered to a woman who'd chosen to let another man's hands rest on her hips while she laughed at the waves? No, I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. I wouldn't give her the power to decide how I felt about myself. So I sat there in the dark, phone screen fading to black, and made a promise to myself. I'd let her have her vacation. Let her have Jared. Let her have the bright sun and the perfect smiles and the fake captions. Because I didn't need them. I didn't need her. I needed the truth. And the truth was simple. She'd shown me exactly who she was. And now it was up to me to decide what to do with that. I stood and walked to the window, staring out at the street below. The city hummed with late-night traffic and neon signs. People living their lives, laughing, crying, moving on. And I realized I could too. I wasn't trapped in her story anymore. I was free to write my own. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing for sure. It wouldn't include her. Not on my terms. Not in my home. And definitely not in my heart. I turned back toward the living room, the phone still in my hand. I opened the app and blocked her mom. One less window into a life that didn't include me. One less reminder of what I'd lost. I closed my eyes, took a breath, and felt the first real sense of peace I'd felt in days. She was gone, and maybe that was the best gift she'd ever given me. I didn't scream, didn't call, didn't even leave a voice note. Instead, I did what I'd always done when the world felt too big, too sharp. I retreated. I spent the weekend in the spare room, our guest room, the one she'd always said was too empty, but I'd always found a strange comfort in its starkness. A simple bed, a nightstand, a small lamp, and a blank wall. A place to think without the clutter of memories. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through the screenshots I'd taken of Loretta's post, the ones with Brielle's smile and Jared's arms like iron bars around her waist. Each image was like a nail in the coffin of the life I'd thought I'd been building. But I didn't let the grief swallow me. I let it harden me. When the sun rose on Saturday, I went to work. Every step was deliberate. I started in the closet, her side, the side I'd carefully given her when we first moved in, the side that smelled like lavender and warm vanilla and a hint of the sandalwood cologne I used to wear just because she liked it. I opened the sliding door and stared at the rows of clothes, some new, some worn, some never even tried on. A life in fabric. I reached for the first item, a floral dress she'd worn to my promotion dinner, and folded it neatly, placing it into a sturdy box I'd labeled in black marker. Box 1, Dresses and Skirts. It felt clinical, safe, like a process with a beginning and an end, like I could control something again. I worked through her wardrobe methodically, folding each piece with the same precision I'd once reserved for arranging her flowers on Sunday mornings. Every blouse, every sweater, every pair of yoga pants. Each went into its own box, labeled and numbered. Box 2, Box 3, Box 4. I made an inventory list for each one, snapped photos of the contents, and attached them to the top of the boxes with clear packing tape. No confusion, no mistakes, nothing she could accuse me of misplacing. I moved to the bathroom next, her half-empty bottles of shampoo and conditioner, the bath salts she'd always bought from that overpriced spa, her makeup bag with the broken zipper. Box 5, Bathroom Essentials. The living room was harder. Her paintbrushes, lined up like soldiers on the bookshelf. The canvas she'd been working on, a swirl of greens and golds that might have been a landscape or maybe just an emotional exorcism, sat on the coffee table. I hesitated. Art had always been her escape, her therapy. I'd respected that. But now, even her therapy felt like a lie. I wrapped the canvas carefully in bubble wrap, 3 layers, and placed it in box 6, Art Supplies. Each brush got its own sleeve of paper, its own label. I wasn't taking chances. The kitchen was next. Her mismatched mugs, some chipped, some with lipstick stains, went into box 7, Kitchen Items. I could still see her sipping coffee on sleepy mornings, legs tucked under her on the bar stool, telling me about her dreams. Now I just saw betrayal. I took each item, wrapped it, photographed it, labeled it. No arguments. No denials. Every mug accounted for. Every glass protected. By the time I reached the bedroom again, the sun was slipping toward the horizon, and the air smelled like dust and cardboard. I sat on the bed, our bed, though it felt foreign now, and stared at the last few items. Her grandmother's earrings, small and delicate, the ones she'd worn on our wedding day. The necklace I'd given her on our first anniversary, the one she'd worn the night we danced under fairy lights in our tiny backyard. I wrapped them in bubble wrap, placed them in a velvet pouch, and marked them. Box 8, Jewelry and Keepsakes. It all felt so final. 12 boxes. 12 neat little coffins for every piece of her life that had bled into mine. I stacked them by the door, each one marked with an inventory sheet and a fragile sticker. I took photos of every box, top, sides, bottom, and saved them to a folder titled Brielle's Property. I didn't want a single accusation of theft. No loopholes for her to exploit later. Every detail accounted for. Then I went online, filled out the forms, and scheduled a courier to pick them up on Monday morning. Address, Loretta and Carlton's home. I wondered if they'd sign for them together, grinning at each other like conspirators. I wondered if Jared would be there. carrying her boxes inside like he was already moving her into a new life. I imagined Loretta's face, tight-lipped and dignified, watching me get erased from her daughter's story, one box at a time. The thought didn't sting as much as I expected. I think I'd run out of pain. When I was done, I vacuumed the rug. It felt like a reset, like wiping away the dust of a betrayal that had grown too heavy to bear. The lines in the carpet made perfect stripes under the lamplight, a small piece of order in a life that had gone so chaotically wrong. I took one last look at the boxes, neat, labeled, final, and felt something shift in my chest, a sense of peace I hadn't expected, because this was closure. This was the end. There'd be no messy fights about what belonged to whom. No teary-eyed phone calls begging me to leave things at her sister's. Everything was handled, professionally, properly. I went to my phone and updated my relationship status to single. It felt like a small victory, like a step forward. I blocked her. I blocked Loretta. I blocked Jared. It was a digital quarantine, a way to keep the infection of their betrayal from spreading any further into my life. The notifications would stop. The photos would vanish. The smiling faces and bright captions would disappear from my feed. I'd made sure of it. When I finished, I stood in the center of the apartment, our apartment, and took a deep breath. The space felt different now, lighter, like a storm had passed and left behind a clearer sky. I could see the future again, even if it was blurry and uncertain, but at least it was mine now. No one else's fingerprints on it. Just me and the choices I'd made to protect myself. I turned off the lights and let the darkness settle around me. The boxes stood like silent sentinels, waiting for the morning. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't even sigh. I just let the quiet fill the room, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for her to come back. I wasn't waiting for anything, because this wasn't about her anymore. This was about me, and I'd already decided. No contact, no drama, no regrets. Just a clean break, a new beginning. And maybe, just maybe, the start of something stronger than what we'd had. Because sometimes, the best way to heal is to pack it all up and ship it away. 3 weeks of silence settled like a weighted blanket on my chest, pressing down every time I walked into the apartment and didn't hear her voice. The first few days, I half expected her to call, to text, to say she'd changed her mind. But nothing came. The quiet stretched into days, and then into nights where the ticking of the clock on the kitchen wall sounded louder than my own breathing. I filled the time with long hours at the gym, overtime at work, meal preps I never used to do alone. I told myself I was finding peace in the quiet. And maybe I was. Maybe that was the only way to heal. Then my phone buzzed, interrupting my dinner of reheated chicken and cold rice. An unknown number lit up the screen. For a second, my chest tightened. It couldn't be her. She'd made her choice. But curiosity won. I picked up. Hello. My voice was calm, steady, like I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. There was a pause, a soft intake of breath on the other end. Then her voice, soft as rain. Mason, it's me. Even after everything, hearing her voice felt like a blade. I closed my eyes, letting it slide between my ribs. I tried to picture her face. Those honey brown eyes that used to shine whenever I walked through the door, the way her lips curled when she was about to laugh. But all I could see was her smile in Jared's arms, bright and easy, like the pain she'd left me with didn't exist. Hi, Brielle, I said, my tone polite but cold, like I was talking to a distant acquaintance, not the woman I'd promised forever to. She must have felt the chill. She hesitated. I've been thinking, she started, the words slow and careful, like stepping onto thin ice. About us. About everything. I think I'm ready to talk. Really talk. I've been working through things, and I want to try. With us. Her voice cracked, and for a second, I wondered if she was crying. The old me would have leapt to comfort her, to tell her it was okay, that we'd figure it out together. But that man was gone. He'd packed up her life in 12 boxes and sent it to her mother's house. He'd vacuumed the rug and blocked her number. He decided that peace meant silence. I didn't answer right away. I let the pause stretch until it was uncomfortable. I wanted her to feel it, to know that this wasn't her story to write anymore. Finally, I took a breath and said it. There is no us, Brielle. The words came out level, sharp. No tremble, no apology, just the truth. She sucked in a breath, and I imagined her eyes widening in that way they always did when she didn't get what she wanted. Mason, she whispered. Please. I've been working on myself. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I needed time. I needed to figure out who I was without you. Her voice broke again. I just want to try. Just one more chance. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone like it was the last lifeline between me and the past. My chest tightened, but I didn't let it break me. I'd given her all the chances she'd asked for. I'd given her space. I'd given her time. I'd given her everything, even when it hurt. But I wasn't going to give her more than I had left. Brielle, I said, my voice steady. You had your chance. You made your choice. I'm not a backup plan. Silence on the other end. The kind of silence that vibrates with regret. I could almost see her, standing somewhere she thought was safe, phone pressed to her ear, eyes wide with the realization that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't coming back. Mason, she tried again, her voice smaller now. Please don't do this. We were good together. I just got confused. I almost laughed, but it came out as a dry exhale. Confused, I repeated, rolling the word around in my mouth like it was something I'd never heard before. Is that what they call it when you're on a beach with your ex-boyfriend's hands on your hips? The words hung in the air like smoke. She didn't answer, couldn't answer, because we both knew the truth, and there was no way to spin it. Look, I continued, my voice like cold steel. I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to beg. I'm not even going to blame you anymore. But there's nothing left for us to fix. You walked out. You asked for space. And I gave it to you. I paused, letting that sink in. Turns out, that space was enough for me to figure out who I was without you. A muffled sob came through the line, and for a brief second, I almost faltered. Almost. But then I remembered the screenshots. The laughter. The way she looked at him like he was the answer to a question I hadn't even known she was asking. And I hardened again. Goodbye, Brielle, I said. Then I hung up. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. It was freeing. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter, its screen black and lifeless. I ran a hand through my hair and exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I'd done it. I'd said the words that had been building inside me for weeks, the words that marked the true end. And it felt like tearing off a bandage that had been stuck too long. Painful, but necessary. I walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The lights glowed like stars against the darkness, each one a reminder that life went on. That somewhere, someone was starting fresh. Maybe that someone could be me. I'd spent so long defining myself by her, by us, that I'd forgotten there was a me in the middle of it all. A man who'd given everything and asked for so little. A man who'd believed in loyalty and trust and promises made under moonlit skies. And now? Now I was a man who knew his worth. Who knew that sometimes loving someone meant letting them go. Letting them figure themselves out, far away from the pieces of you they'd already broken. I turned away from the window, the city's glow still warm on my skin, and felt something new settle in my chest. Something strong. Something like peace. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to know. I was enough, just as I was. And that was a truth she could never take from me again. She tried to pretend confusion, the way she always did when she got caught. I could almost hear the rehearsed innocence in her voice, the way her tone shifted as if I were being unfair. Mason, I don't understand. The break wasn't a breakup, she said, her voice strained through the speaker. I imagined her twisting a lock of hair around her finger, biting her lip like she used to do when she was waiting for me to say something comforting. But I wasn't that man anymore. Her performance didn't move me. She paused, probably waiting for me to jump in with forgiveness, with reassurance, with a promise that I'd wait while she figured herself out. But silence stretched between us like a taut rope. Jared, I said flatly. Your mom's photos. His hands on your hips. That didn't look like confusion, Brielle. That looked like a choice. I could hear her swallow. That small sound gave me a grim satisfaction. Jared was just there, she said quickly, as though proximity justified betrayal. He's been going through stuff too, and I didn't plan it. My mom was clueless about how social media works. She just wanted a family album. That's all. Her voice wavered, but I could almost picture her face, eyes wide, trying to sell the lie. She'd always been good at that. Too good. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. You didn't plan it, I echoed, but you sure as hell posed for it. I felt my voice tighten with every word. each syllable a hook pulling up memories I didn't want to relive. Her laughter, her smell, the way she'd leaned into me and said I was the only man she'd ever really loved. Now those memories felt like stories from a book I'd never wanted to read. She sniffled. Mason, please. You're blowing this out of proportion. It was just a break. Time for me to think. You were supposed to give me space. Not judge me like this. Her tone shifted again, that edge of defensiveness creeping in. I recognized it. The way she'd always turned the blame back on me. The way she'd made me question my own instincts. Not this time. Space, I repeated. That's what you called it. Space. And what did you do with that space? You filled it with him. That's not confusion, Brielle. That's betrayal. I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the street below. Cars drifted past, like lazy fireflies. Somewhere down there, people were living lives that hadn't been shattered by lies. She started to panic. I could hear it. Mason, my sketchbooks, my grandmother's earrings. Where are they? Please, those are important to me. Her words came in a rush, like a dam breaking. Please tell me you didn't just throw everything away. I imagined her rummaging through her sister's spare room, finding nothing of hers, realizing I'd stripped her from my space like peeling off old wallpaper. They're in box 8, I said calmly. Bubble-wrapped. Labeled. Shipped to your parents' place. I made an inventory list. Everything's accounted for. You're welcome. Her breath hitched, and I almost felt a pang of pity. But that passed as quickly as it came. Because this was the woman who'd lied to my face and thought I'd just let it slide. God, Mason, why are you being so vindictive? She spat, the anger finally breaking through the cracks in her voice. I didn't do anything that bad. I just needed time. I felt my jaw tighten. Vindictive. That's what she called it. As if what I'd done was out of spite, and not necessity. Vindictive. I repeated, my tone even controlled. No, Brielle. I'm being thorough. So there's no confusion. So there's no, maybe it got lost, or, I forgot. I made sure you got every last piece of the life you left behind. Every last mug. Every last hairpin. Every last hope I had in us. My voice trembled at the edge of that last word, but I steadied it. She let out a soft sob, like she was shocked by my coldness. I can't believe you're being like this, she whispered, her voice small. We were supposed to be partners. You said you'd always support me, even when things got hard. I clenched my teeth. Partners. That was a word she'd used so often, but it had lost its meaning. Partners don't abandon each other at the first sign of difficulty. Partners don't find comfort in old flames when things get complicated. We were partners, I agreed, until you stopped being one. I let the silence stretch again, giving her time to absorb it. You chose your path. You chose your support system. You chose Jared. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was sharp enough to do the cutting. She sniffled again, and I could almost picture the tears. I just wanted to feel alive again, she said softly. Everything got so heavy between us. Work, bills, the pressure. I needed to remember who I was before it all. Her voice cracked. I never wanted to hurt you. I sighed, a deep, tired exhale. But you did, I said. And the thing is, I'm done carrying the weight of your confusion. You wanted to figure yourself out? That's fine. But don't ask me to clean up the mess after. I ran a hand through my hair, the tension easing from my shoulders as the words fell into place. Your things are at your parents'. Your art. Your memories. Everything you left behind. I made sure you got it all. Because that's who I am. That's the man you left. A man who finishes what he starts. She was crying now, the sound muffled and ragged. Mason, please, she whimpered. But I was done with please. I was done with maybe. I was done with all the half-finished promises and half-felt apologies. Goodbye, Brielle, I said. My voice was calm, but inside, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, wind in my hair, ready to let go of the last thing that tethered me to her. I ended the call before she could respond. I leaned against the window frame, letting the cool glass steady me. Outside, the night was alive with the sounds of cars, laughter, and the distant echo of a world that didn't care about my heartbreak. I breathed deeply, feeling the air fill my lungs with something close to relief. For the first time in months, I felt like I'd done something for myself, like I'd drawn a line in the sand and refused to let her step over it again. I glanced around the apartment, clean, quiet, my own. No more wondering if she'd come back. No more waiting for apologies. Just me. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was what closure really looked like. A night alone, with your own voice telling you that you did the right thing. I turned off the lamp and let the darkness settle in, feeling more peace in that emptiness than I'd ever felt in her arms. Because sometimes, the best thing you can do for yourself is to stop being the safety net for someone else's free fall. And in that darkness, I found my own light. I thought it was over. I thought my boxes and my silence had drawn a line in the sand she'd never cross again. But betrayal has a way of crawling back in, like mold in the corners you thought you'd cleaned. It was late, nearly midnight, when I pulled into the parking lot, exhausted from a shift that felt like it would never end. I'd been working extra hours, pouring myself into projects, anything to fill the empty spaces she'd left behind. The apartment had started to feel like mine again, a sanctuary. But the moment I swung my car door shut, I knew something was wrong. They were there, on my steps, framed by the dull yellow glow of the porch light. Brielle, red-eyed, clutching the edges of her sweater like a lifeline. And beside her, arms folded and jaw set like a courtroom judge, stood Loretta. Always so composed, always so certain of her own righteousness. I paused, keys in hand, staring at them like I'd stumbled onto the wrong movie set. "We need to talk properly," Loretta said before I even reached the bottom step. Face to face. Her voice carried the same commanding tone that had once made me think she cared about me, back when I was the golden boy who'd married her daughter, the one she bragged about at brunch. Now it just sounded like an accusation. Brielle's eyes were wet and pleading. "Mason, please," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "We never really talked about what happened. Not really. I need to explain." I let her words hang in the air, their weight settling like dust on an old book I'd stopped reading a long time ago. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move closer. I stood my ground. "You had your chance," I said, each word measured. "You had 3 weeks to reach out, to say something that didn't come with excuses or deflections." My voice was calm, but my hands were tied on my keys, as if I might need them to anchor myself. Loretta stepped forward like she was preparing a closing argument. "Mason, this is your marriage we're talking about," she said, her eyes sharp. "You don't just throw that away because of one mistake. She made a poor decision. She knows that now. You should have given her time. You should have given her grace." Grace. The word stung like salt in a wound. Grace was what I'd given her every time she'd stayed late at the office and came home with excuses. Grace was what I'd given her when she said she needed space, but didn't mention that space came with Jared's arms around her waist. Grace was the reason I'd packed her life into neat boxes instead of dumping it on the curb. Brielle wiped at her tears, her mascara smudging under her eyes. "Jared was a mistake," she said, voice trembling. "I swear, Mason, it didn't mean anything. I was lost. I didn't know who I was anymore. I needed to feel something, and he was just there." Her words were frantic, desperate, like a drowning woman reaching for anything that would keep her afloat. I met her gaze without flinching. "Mistakes," I said. "Mistakes are forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner. Mistakes don't usually require swimsuits and matching cocktails." My tone was ice cold, but I didn't feel cold inside. I felt alive, like every piece of myself she'd chipped away at was finally growing back. Brielle flinched, and Loretta's face darkened. "That's not fair," she snapped. "You know social media makes things look worse than they are. You should have waited for her to explain before you packed her things and shut her out." Her voice dripped with authority, the kind that expects obedience. I let out a breath, steady and controlled. "Loretta, I didn't ask her to lie. I didn't ask her to pose for pictures with her ex. I didn't ask her to put me on hold while she figured herself out. But I did make sure she had every single one of her things wrapped, labeled, and delivered. Because that's the kind of man I am." Brielle's lower lip quivered. "Mason, I love you," she whispered. I messed up. I need you to forgive me. We can fix this. I know we can." Her eyes searched mine, desperate for the softness she'd always found in me. But there was no softness left for her. I shook my head slowly. "Brielle," I said, my voice a quiet finality. "Love doesn't look like betrayal. It doesn't look like secrets and silent retreats. Love is trust. And you broke that." I took a step closer, but not to hold her. Just enough to let her see that I wasn't afraid of her tears anymore. "I gave you space. I gave you respect. I gave you every chance. But I'm done giving." She started to cry, shoulders shaking. Loretta reached out to steady her, but her eyes never left me, calculating, sharp. You'll regret this, she said coldly. You'll see what happens when you throw away a marriage like it's nothing. She tightened her grip on Brielle's arm and pulled her a step back. I let the words hang in the night air, but they didn't pierce me. Not anymore. Maybe I will, I said quietly. But at least I'll know I didn't let myself be a doormat. I turned and unlocked the door, the key sliding into the lock with a satisfying click. Before I pushed it open, I looked back at them one last time. Good night, I said. And then I stepped inside and closed the door, leaving them on the steps with their regrets and excuses. The apartment was quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the distant city sounds. I leaned against the door, breathing in the silence like oxygen. I braced myself for the pain of this confrontation, but instead, I felt lighter, like I'd finally shut the last window she'd left open. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and let it cool my throat. Outside, their voices faded as they left, the click of their heels on the concrete a slow retreat. I set the glass down and exhaled. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need her apologies. I'd given my all, and she'd spent it. Now it was my turn to spend time on me, my peace, my healing, my own life. As I turned off the lights and headed for the bedroom, I realized that sometimes closure doesn't come with a bow or a neat explanation. Sometimes it comes with a locked door and the knowledge that you were strong enough to close it yourself. And that was enough for me. You changed the locks? Her voice cracked through the speaker like thunder on a dry day. I could practically see her face, eyes wide, lips trembling, hands on hips like she'd just been wronged. I stayed quiet for a second, letting the question settle, as though it deserved a reply beyond the obvious. Of course, I changed the locks. What did she expect? That I'd leave the door wide open for her to walk back in, arms full of excuses and cheap apologies? Yes, I said finally, my tone even. I was proud of how steady it came out, unshaken by the tremor in her voice. I changed the locks. It's my apartment now, my space. I'm done leaving it open for someone who doesn't live here anymore. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. It was her tell, the sound she always made when she was about to launch into an argument. I braced myself, leaning against the kitchen counter, the cold marble pressing into my palms like an anchor. You threw away my plant or two, didn't you? She demanded. The one with the succulents from our anniversary trip? How could you just— I cut her off. Box 3, I said, my voice calm but firm. Labeled, padded, double-wrapped, sent to your parents' place along with everything else. I let the silence stretch, picturing her face in that moment. The indignation deflating like a popped balloon. Loretta's voice cut in next, sharp, brittle, as if she'd been waiting for her cue. Mason, you humiliated my daughter, she snapped. She's been through enough without you treating her like a criminal. You boxed up her life and shipped it away like garbage. How dare you? I could almost see her, standing in her designer flats and holding a cup of herbal tea like a gavel. She'd always carried herself like a judge, all stern authority and righteous anger. But not tonight. Tonight, I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I didn't humiliate her, I said, my voice steady as stone. I respected her decision to leave. I respected her space. I respected her enough to pack her things with care. Everything she left behind, every paintbrush, every mug, every goddamn memory, I treated it like it mattered. Because it did. To me, it did. And now it's hers again. I didn't throw away a single thing. I let the weight of my words hang there, filling the space where her judgment tried to settle. Brielle tried to jump in then, her voice shaky. Mason, I didn't mean for things to get so complicated, she pleaded. I just needed time to breathe, to figure myself out. You always rushed me. You never gave me the space to— I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. You left, Brielle. You chose space, and I gave it to you. But you didn't need space. You needed an alibi, and I'm done giving you that. She went silent. The only sound on the line was her shaky breath, as if she was trying to figure out which line might still work on me. Loretta, though, wasn't done. She's your wife, she said, her voice lowering into that scolding tone that always made me grit my teeth. You took vows. You promised to stand by her. Through everything. You can't just walk away because things got difficult. I felt my jaw tighten, the memory of that wedding day pressing against my skull like a bad dream. The white dress, the trembling hands, the vows whispered like secrets. I'd meant every word. I'd stood by her when her father got sick, when her career hit a wall, when she said she didn't know who she was anymore. I'd given her everything. And what had she given me? A break. Space. Jared's hands on her hips. You're right, Loretta, I said, my voice low and steady. I did take vows. I took them seriously. Every day. Every night. I put her first even when it cost me sleep, when it cost me peace, when it cost me myself. But she broke those vows the moment she found comfort in someone else's arms. The moment she decided my loyalty was something she could take for granted. My voice caught for a fraction of a second, but I pressed on. So, no, I don't owe her an open door. I don't owe her a second chance to hurt me. And I sure as hell don't owe you an explanation for choosing to protect my own damn heart. The line went quiet. Just the hum of the city outside my window and the echo of my own words ringing in my ears. I could imagine them standing there, Brielle looking small and shaken, Loretta's lips pursed in anger. Good. Let them stew in it. Let them see the man I've become. Look, I said after a moment, softer now but no less certain. I didn't ask her to leave. I didn't ask her to lie. But I'm not going to be the one who keeps pretending everything's okay just because it makes things easier for her. She wanted a new chapter? Fine. But she doesn't get to keep using my pages. I let the words settle, final and heavy. A truth I'd been holding inside for too long. Brielle let out a choked sob. Mason, I just wanted us to be happy, she whispered. Her voice was small, lost, the voice of a girl who'd always had a safety net, and now realized it was gone. We had something good. I messed up, I know. But can't we just start over? Can't we try? I felt something break inside me then. A sharp pain that flared and then dulled into a quiet resignation. You're right, I said, voice steady but soft. We did have something good. Once. But you broke it. And I can't pretend it didn't happen. I won't. Because every time I look at you, I'll see him. Every time I hear your voice, I'll hear the lies you told me. And I deserve better than that. I deserve a life without wondering when the next betrayal will come. Loretta muttered something under her breath, something like unbelievable. But I didn't respond. I'd said what I needed to say. I'd drawn the line. And it felt like the first honest breath I'd taken in months. I heard Brielle's voice one last time, small and trembling. I don't know how to let you go, she said, like a confession. I closed my eyes, my heart steady. You don't have to, I told her. Because I already did. I ended the call and set the phone down. The room was silent, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like mine. I looked around at the boxes I'd packed, the couch I'd picked out, the framed photo of my late father on the bookshelf. Everything in this space was mine again. The lock on the door felt solid, secure. The barrier I'd needed between the man I'd been and the man I was becoming. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was losing something. I felt like I'd won something. My peace. My dignity. My freedom. And I wasn't about to let them take that away. 10 days later, I was heading into the weekend with a semblance of calm when an email hit my inbox with the subject line, formal notice of claim. The sender? Brielle's lawyer. I let out a slow breath and clicked it open, bracing myself for the worst. The message was short and clinical, as though we'd never shared a life together, like I was just a name on a spreadsheet. Brielle was demanding $6,000 for emotional distress and displacement. She claimed I'd mishandled shared property, her sketchbooks, her jewelry, even a half-used bottle of her favorite perfume. She claimed I'd been vindictive, that I'd abandoned her without notice. I stared at the words, letting them sink in like water in a cracked foundation. For a minute, my hands shook. The nerve of her. After everything, after the photos, after Jared's hands on her hips and her mother's lectures on loyalty, she had the audacity to accuse me of wrongdoing. I closed my eyes, letting the anger wash over me before I picked up the phone. Grace. I'd hired her a week after Brielle left, a no-nonsense lawyer with a reputation for turning messy divorces into clean exits. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and businesslike. Mason, I was about to call you. I saw the email, she said, already one step ahead. I explained what I'd read, my voice tight. She listened without interruption, her silence a steady bomb against the rage that threatened to boil over. When I was done, she let out a small laugh, cold, like ice breaking in a glass. They're trying to rattle you, she said. Don't let them. I exhaled, my shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. What do we do? I asked. She chuckled again, this time with an edge of satisfaction. We respond, she said, with receipts. And respond she did. By the time Monday morning rolled around, Grace had drafted a letter so sharp it could have cut through steel. She attached the courier receipts, every box I'd sent, each one marked fragile, with a tracking number and a signature from Brielle's father, Carlton. She included photos of the boxes, neatly sealed and labeled, each one with its own inventory list. There was no room for doubt. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. Nothing was thrown away. She even included screenshots of Loretta's vacation album, the one where Brielle's smile lit up the screen while Jared's hand rested on her hip, just to remind them that I hadn't abandoned her, she'd abandoned me. Grace's letter ended with a simple, brutal line. Any further harassment will be met with a countersuit for defamation and emotional distress. I read the draft 3 times, each time feeling the knot in my chest loosen just a bit more. I imagined Brielle opening that email, the color draining from her face as she realized she wasn't the only one who could play the game. I imagined Loretta reading it too, her righteous indignation withering under the weight of cold, hard evidence. Part of me felt petty, but most of me felt relieved. This was my line in the sand. No more tears. No more apologies. Just the truth. That night, I poured myself a drink, a cheap whiskey I'd picked up at the corner store, and sat on the couch, staring at the city lights through the window. I let the amber liquid burn its way down my throat, a reminder that sometimes the hardest medicine was the one that tasted the worst. I thought about the emails, the boxes, the months of silence that had turned my heart into something harder than it had ever been. I wondered if Brielle thought she could just snap her fingers and make it all go away. Maybe she'd thought I'd crumble the way I used to, that I'd drop everything and beg her to come back. But that man was gone, buried under the weight of her lies. Grace called the next morning, her voice triumphant. "She's rattled," she said. "Her lawyer called me twice, trying to negotiate. I told him to save it for the courtroom. I'm not here to negotiate with people who think they can rewrite history." I let out a dry laugh. "You're good at this," I said. She didn't laugh. "Mason, I'm good at my job because I believe in facts," she replied. "And the facts are on your side. Let them chase their own shadows. We'll stay right here." For the first time in weeks, I felt a weight lift off my chest. I hadn't just survived this mess, I'd fought back. On my terms. I'd drawn my own boundaries and held them. I'd watched the people who thought they could control me stumble over their own arrogance. And it felt good. Not vengeful. Just clean. Like the first breath of air after a long storm. I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through my emails, looking at the reply Grace had sent, each attachment carefully labeled, each screenshot like a shield. I thought about Brielle's lawyer reading through them, line by line, realizing how meticulously I documented every detail of her departure. I thought about Loretta's self-righteous lectures, crumbling under the evidence of her own social media posts. It was like building a wall between me and their chaos, a wall made of receipts and truth. And behind that wall, I felt safe. I poured another glass of whiskey and raised it in a quiet toast to myself. To the man who didn't yell. To the man who didn't beg. To the man who learned that sometimes the strongest weapon is silence and a good lawyer. I thought about all the times I'd given Brielle the benefit of the doubt, the grace she'd never given me. I thought about the nights I'd sat awake wondering what I'd done wrong, how I'd failed her. But the evidence didn't lie. The boxes didn't lie. The photos didn't lie. And that was the difference between me and her. I hadn't hidden anything. I hadn't run away from my choices. I'd faced them. And I'd survived. The apartment felt different that night. Warmer. Lighter. Like a place I could actually call home again. No more wondering if she'd come back. No more checking my phone for messages that never came. Just me, my couch, my whiskey, and the knowledge that I'd fought for myself and won. I turned on the TV and let the noise fill the space where her laughter used to echo. It wasn't the same, but it was enough. As I watched the credits roll on some mindless sitcom, I thought about the line Grace had written at the end of her letter. Any further harassment will be met with a countersuit. I let the words sink in. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't the man who'd wait for her to change her mind. I was the man who'd learned that sometimes love doesn't mean waiting. Sometimes it means letting go, no matter how much it hurts. I raised my glass one last time, the amber liquid catching the light like a promise. "Here's to me," I whispered, "to the man who stayed." And as I drank, I felt the strength settle in my bones, steady and unbreakable. I'd faced the storm. I'd weathered it. And I was still here. And that, I realized, was enough. More than enough. Word got around faster than I expected. It started with whispers at the office, an offhand comment at the coffee shop, A neighbor's knowing glance in the elevator. I should have known Brielle wouldn't keep her meltdown private. When people get caught, they flail. They grab at any attention that might paint them as the victim, rewrite the story in their favor. But screenshots don't lie, and I had plenty of those. Her meltdown came at me like a summer storm, loud, unpredictable, but easy enough to stand under if you'd prepared. And I had. Jared ghosted her. That was the word that trickled down from mutuals who couldn't help but share every detail. Turns out he couldn't handle her baggage, or maybe he'd realized she wasn't the perfect second chance he'd imagined. I didn't celebrate his absence, but I also didn't mourn it. Jared was her problem now. Let him handle the tears and the confusion and the constant need for reassurance. I was done with all of that. Brielle's meltdown was public, too. A friend of a friend messaged me screenshots of her posts, cryptic quotes about heartbreak, blurry photos of tears, captions that painted me as the cold-hearted man who boxed her out of his life. I read them with a kind of detached curiosity, like I was looking at a stranger's drama instead of my own. She called me unfeeling, manipulative, a man who'd shipped her life away with barcodes. The phrase made me laugh. I'd always believed in order and accountability. She'd called that controlling. Now it was a shield between us, a shield I was grateful for. Loretta tried to stir the pot among our old friends. She called them one by one, telling them how heartless I'd been, how I'd turned my back on her daughter when she needed me most. She left out the part about Jared. She left out the part where Brielle had chosen to leave, to find herself in someone else's arms. But receipts don't lie. And when people started asking the right questions, Loretta's voice started to tremble. Because the truth has a way of finding its way to the surface, no matter how many lies you pile on top. People started to reach out, some with concern, others with curiosity, a few with apologies. I listened to each one, measured my words carefully. I wasn't about to get drawn into a pity party or a debate about who was right or wrong. I'd said my piece. I'd given her space. The boxes were delivered, the receipts were in order, and the locks were changed. My conscience was clean. One evening, I got a text from a friend who'd known both of us since college. "Man, I'm sorry," it read. "I saw what she posted, but I also saw the screenshots. Don't let her drag you down. You did what you had to do." I stared at the message, feeling a strange warmth in my chest. It wasn't about vindication. It was about being seen. About knowing someone else understood the line I'd drawn, the boundaries I'd enforced. I wrote back, "Thanks. I'm good. Just focusing on moving forward." And I meant it. I'd stopped checking her accounts by then. I didn't need to see the drama unfold in real time. I didn't need the reminder that she'd chosen the public eye over a private apology. Let her tell her story to whoever would listen. I had my own story to live, and it didn't include her anymore. One night, a mutual friend called me. His voice was tight, hesitant. "Mason, I hate to even bring this up, but she's saying you threw out her sketchbooks. That you took her grandmother's earrings and sold them. That you..." "I don't know, man. People are talking." I let out a breath, steady, calm. "Tell them to ask her parents," I said. "Tell them to ask for the courier receipts, the photos of every single item. Everything's documented. Everything's accounted for. The earrings are in box 8. The sketchbooks are wrapped in tissue paper, labeled, delivered, and signed for by her father." He was quiet on the other end. "I figured," he said. "Just thought you should know." I thanked him and ended the call. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the last piece of her drama slip off my shoulders like a weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. The city felt different after that. Cleaner, somehow. The same streets I'd walked with her felt wider, brighter. The air felt easier to breathe. I started going for evening runs, letting the rhythm of my footsteps pound out the last echoes of her voice in my head. I'd come home, sweaty and tired, and stand under the shower with the water beating down on me like rain. And each time, I felt lighter. I started to see people again, old friends, new faces. I found myself at a bar one Friday night, laughing at a story I'd heard 1,000 times before, but for the first time in ages, it felt new. I ordered a drink and toasted to the man I was becoming, the man who knew his worth, the man who'd learned that some people's apologies come too late. And that was okay. I didn't need her apology anymore. I didn't need her validation. I'd given myself enough closure to last a lifetime. One afternoon, I got a final email from Grace. No further contact from her lawyer, she wrote. No countersuit. No claim. Just silence. "Congratulations, Mason. You're free." I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over. You're free. It felt like a benediction, like a door swinging open on a new life. That night, I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, no whiskey, just something warm and comforting. I scrolled through the photos on my phone, sunsets, my nephew's birthday party, the view from my new office. No photos of her. No photos of us. Just moments that were mine. I realized then that the best revenge wasn't a fiery email or a countersuit or even a perfectly wrapped box. The best revenge was living my life with peace, with dignity, with a heart that no longer needed her to understand why she'd lost me. Let her unpack her mess. Let her tell her story to whoever would listen. My story was simple. I survived. I healed. I thrived. And now, every step I took was a step away from the chaos she'd left behind. Let them talk. Let them wonder. I had receipts. I had the truth. But most of all, I had myself. And that was worth more than any apology she could ever give. It's been quiet. Peaceful even. The apartment feels like mine now, every corner echoing with a kind of calm I hadn't realized I'd been craving. No more scented oils on the bookshelf. No more half-finished mugs of coffee abandoned in the sink. No more passive-aggressive sticky notes on the fridge reminding me to buy almond milk or empty the dishwasher. Just me, and the rhythm of my own breathing, my own routines. My gym shoes sit neatly by the door, a reminder of the runs that have become my new therapy. The way the pavement feels solid under my feet. Each step a declaration that I'm moving forward, one stride at a time. No more waiting for apologies that would never come. No more questions that would never be answered. Just sweat and breath and the steady beat of my own heart. And it feels good. It feels like freedom. I've started dating again. Nothing serious. Just light dinners, easy conversations, laughter that doesn't come with strings attached. No one's asking me to fix their broken pieces, and I'm not offering mine either. It's refreshing. The first date was a quiet dinner with a woman named Lydia. She's smart, funny, the kind of person who listens without waiting to speak. We talked about movies and books and the weird way city lights look on rainy nights. She didn't ask me about Brielle, and I didn't bring her up. Because this is my time now, my chance to step into a life that isn't defined by what I've lost, but by what I can build. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Brielle, about the way she used to hum while painting, or the way she'd curl her legs under her on the couch. I don't think about Jared or her mother's condescending tone. I think about the woman I married, the one who used to look at me like I was the only person in the room. I think about the promises we made and the way she walked away from them. And then I remind myself that the version of her I loved doesn't exist anymore. Maybe she never did. And that's okay. Because the version of me that needed her validation doesn't exist anymore either. The other day, I walked past the bench at the park where she first told me she loved me. I paused for a moment, letting the memory flicker like an old film reel. Her laugh, the way the wind caught her hair, the soft tremble in her voice. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel bitter. I just felt grateful. Because loving her taught me how to love myself, how to stand up for my own worth, how to pack up a life that was breaking me and send it on its way, how to say goodbye. The best revenge, I've realized, isn't about rage or destruction. It's about removing yourself from the cycle that hurts you. It's about choosing peace over chaos, dignity over drama. It's about building a life so full and rich that the person who once broke your heart becomes a footnote, a lesson learned, a page turned. And that's what I've done. I've stepped out of her story and into my own. And every day, I get to decide how that story unfolds. Tonight, I'll set my alarm for an early run. I'll meet Lydia for coffee afterward, and maybe we'll laugh about something silly, a dog in a sweater, a kid with chocolate on his face. I'll come home, open the windows, and let the light pour in. I'll make dinner for one, and it'll be enough. More than enough. Because I've learned that I'm enough. With or without her. Always was. Always will be.